Good evening, dear listener. As you settle in for the night, find a comfortable place for your hands and let your shoulders loosen whenever you're ready to drift off. I'll keep a quiet pace and a steady voice, the way a small fire keeps its glow after the room has gone still. Tonight, let's quietly explore for gentle corners of daily life, where work moved by habit and time was measured by simple tasks. First, we will walk the circuit of Victorian lamplighters who carried their poles and tools through damp streets at dusk and again at dawn. Then we will sit inside a Mesopotamian tablet house, where clay met reed and signs learned to stand in neat rows. After that, we'll follow the patient rhythm of Dobus at a South Asian river got cloth soaked, scrubbed, and lifted into the breeze. Lastly, we'll rest in a Song-era workshop and watch paper form from water, one thin sheet at a time. There will be no rush and no alarms. Only the small sounds of useful things. A wick trimmed, a stylus pressed, fabric rinsed, a screen rising from a vat. If sleep arrives, let it. The past will keep its slow path, and you can rejoin us wherever your dreams set you down. Breathe in, breathe out, and let the quiet of ordinary work carry you toward rest. We begin with a simple promise of light. A coat lifted from a peg, a cap pulled down against damp air, a leather satchel checked by touch, not by sight, small wrench, soft rag, a tin of whiting for glass, spare mantles folded like pale shells, a coil of cotton wick for those older fittings that still prefer flame. The lamplighter's pole rests by the door ash wood straight, the top fitted with a hook, a small protective hood, and a quiet spark maker that needs only a thumb to oblige. The street waits with the kind of gray that belongs to the hour before windows gather their own glow. The route is a loop learned by feet and by seasons. Not every evening feels the same length. Fog asks for earlier steps. Clear skies allow a slower start. The lamplighter keeps a pocket watch, but trusts the sky. The soft dimness between shop light and night is his truest signal. Boots meet cobbles with a rhythm that neither hurries nor hesitates. The pole tips forward at each corner, a companion that knows when to lean and when to be still. At the first post, the glass globe holds yesterday's weather on its surface, salt from the sea air or a film left by smoke. He sets the pole tip into its little bracket on the iron, a ledge that saves the shoulders and steadies the arms. A gentle twist of a small brass stop, a touch to wake the gas, and the mantle receives the spark with a soft gloom. No crackle, no show. Only a round breath of light. He watches a beat to be sure the flame settles into a steady cone, then lowers the pole. A rag clears the glass in slow circles. The light improves by a quiet degree, not enough to impress, only enough to please. A gentle aside. Later in the century, mantles gave a clean, steady brightness, delicate mesh that glowed without being consumed. Earlier lamps relied on simple wicks. Their care demanded trimming and fresh oil. A lamplighter learned both languages. Because streets adopted change at different speeds, one post at a time. He notes the post's condition in a small root book, hinge easy, glass hairline at lower seam, mantle sound. The pencil writes without drama. These marks are promises to the morning, when tools for repair will travel the same path in daylight. The book returns to a pocket where the cloth has already remembered its shape. He moves on. A stretch of terrace houses offers for lamps in close company. He tends them as a set. At the second, a mantle shows a tiny tear at the edge, a bright spot, and a thin hiss tell the story. He closes the tap, waits long enough for safety to be a fact, and fits the spare with fingers that have learned to be careful without being slow. The new mantle settles like a small collar. He opens the tap again and coaxes flame back to life. With the rag he clears a thumbprint from the inside of the globe, then smiles at himself for leaving it there. In rain, the coat's shoulder darkens first, the pole's hood keeps the spark honest, drops gather along the rim of the globe, turn to lines, and then to a soft drip. The light behind wet glass feels warmer to the eye. Though the air remains cool on the cheeks, he takes shorter steps on slick stone. The pace adjusts, but the calm remains. Children sometimes watch from a doorway. They do not call out. They simply follow with their eyes as each point of light learns its place. The lamplighter lifts a hand in a small greeting that needs no words. At a corner shop, the owner nods while turning the sign to close, a shape of letters that hardly matters once the lamp above the door begins its work. A gentle aside, lighting order matters. Crossings and corners first, then long stretches where the eye benefits from regular intervals. Alleys that serve night bakers and carters receive attention early. A lamplighter's map is not the printed one. It is drawn by footsteps and the memory of where people move after sunset. At a square, wind pulls at the flame through a vent meant to breathe but not to complain. He reduces the gas a fraction and cleans the vent of a curled leaf that found its way there. The light steadies. He checks the finial at the top, still tight, and rubs a narrow line of whiting onto a pane where grime has settled into stubbornness. The rag turns darker, the glass clearer. The lamp looks as if it has taken a deep breath. He keeps to the route's natural slope so the body's ask is modest. Up one hill, down another, the pole balanced in one hand, the other free for taps, latches, and little fixes. A narrow street keeps puddles even after dry days. He steps around them without thought. The smell near the river changes the air, tar, rope, and a sweet hint of fruit from a barrow that will be gone by morning. In such places, lamps are placed slightly higher, their light folding outward in softer fans, enough for a cartwheel, enough for a shoulder, never so much that darkness feels chaste. He pauses at a post that leans a touch toward the gutter. A chalk mark at the base will remind the crew that wood at the foot has begun to soften. He tests the bracket with the pole's weight. It holds for now, the flame is sound. He leaves a note in the book base inspection and moves on. A gentle aside. The lamplighter's tools are few because the work repeats. The best tools are pace and attention. A steady hand protects a fragile mantle better than any clever device. A clean rag makes the biggest difference. The rest is listening how a hiss changes when a tap is a fraction open or when air pulls where it should not. As dusk deepens, the street learns itself again. The line of lamps looks like a necklace set down gently along the curb. Windows brighten in reply one by one, as if taking turns. The lamplighter's route curves back toward his starting point in a wide loop. Two cats trade places beneath a stair. A delivery cart rattles over a join in the cobbles and then quiets as the road returns to smooth stone. He lights the last lamp on this side of the parish and stands for a breath to look back. The work offers its own proof, even spaces, even glow, even calm. He turns for home by a parallel street, already walking toward night. A man with a newspaper under his arm nods thanks without making a sound. A woman carrying a basket steps a little closer to the curb where the light meets the edge of her shawl. The lamplighter recognizes faces not by name but by silhouette and the way certain shoulders set against weather. He does not need to know more. His part is enough. At the door, the satchel returns to its peg. The pole rests in its corner. The coat is brushed once along the sleeve to scatter the last of the day's dust. He writes 2 lines in a larger ledger with the same careful handroot completed. 2 mantles replaced, 1 base marked for morning. The lamp above his own table burns low for a little while, then waits for dawn to ask the next question. Night loosens its hold the way a hand relaxes after work. The lamplighter wakes before the street believes in morning tea warm in a chip mug, bread set by the stove's slow heat. Boots are wiped, not polished, shine has no duty at this hour. The same satchel opens to different tools, a snuffer shaped like a small bell on a swivel, a narrow brush, a bottle of weak spirits for stubborn soot, a roll of soft wire, and a pocket full of mantles wrapped in paper. The pole waits with a fresh wick in its spark head, though he will need flame only for testing. Outside, the eastern clouds are ash blue. Birds speak as if trying lines for the day. Milk carts turn corners softly. A baker's boy carries trays of unbaked loaves toward a fire that is already awake. The lamplighter sets his pace to meet the lamps while they still belong to night. He begins where crossings are busiest at breakfast, so that the city will find its footing by habit. At the first post, the globe holds a bead of moisture along its lower rim. The flame inside has kept small company with the dark and looks ready to rest. He steadies the pole, raises the snuffer's little bell, and lowers it over the mantel with the gentleness one uses to cover a sleeping child. The short sigh, a curl of pale smoke that climbs and then decides to go nowhere, and the light is gone. He opens the side pane and lets the faint breath out. The morning accepts it without comment. A gentle aside, snuffing rather than blowing protects both mantel and glass. Gas taps should close first, but a neat snuff keeps heat from arguing with trapped air. Best of all is a sequence deuce. Snuff, air done with the same rhythm every time so the hands do not have to think. He reaches the tap and turns it closed a quarter past firm. The mantel's ghost glow fades to a memory. Soot on the chimney's inner vent gets a few calm strokes from the narrow brush. The glass receives a wipe that clears the night's fine breath into streakless patience. If a pane shows a hairline, he writes a small mark in the book and underlines the entry order pane size C. The note will walk itself to the yard by noon. By the second lamp a moth rests against the inside glass, wings the color of dust on flour. He opens the pane and coaxes it out with the softest touch of the brush handle. It steps onto the wood without knowing it has moved, and then into air that discovers it kindly. He closes the pane and checks the hinge pin that has begun to think about rust. A drop of oil speaks to it in a language hinges like. The city's day gathers. A street sweeper leans on his broom and nods. They share a brief chat made of weather and routine. Glass held last night. Wine was decent. Such sentences have no need to be longer. At a shop where the sign swings, the lamplighter ties the bracket's loose screw with 2 twists of soft wire until a proper screw can replace it. He leaves a chalk cross on the post's base for the carpenter and moves on. At the mews, lamps are placed lower because the lane is tight, and horses do not care for glare at eye level. One mantel has failed and the dark collapsed into a delicate, cotton white shell that gave no light after its last breath. He removes it with a cup formed from his palm and paper, sets a fresh mantle on the burner collar, and tightens the tiny cap ring with 2 careful turns. Tap opened, spark offered, and the new mesh blushes to life. He keeps the flame small for a moment, then lets it find its proper roundness. The glass gets a second wipe where a finger learned to wander. He smiles again at himself and leaves the pane cleaner than it needs to be. A gentle aside, roots are counted in lamps, not streets. A lamplighter might have 100 to 200 lights, depending on the district's spread and the pattern of alleys. Pay is regular, the uniform simple, and the pride mostly private, measured in an evening's line of steady circles and a morning's neat snuffs. Fog along the river bank hangs low. He shortens his stride so boots can tell in where stone becomes slick. Lamps here often gather soot more quickly, coal barges and chimneys teach the air to hold more. The brush does its small diplomacy. A cloth finished in spirits lifts what water will not. He leaves the vent queer. A reed tucked by some child in the finial yesterday becomes a pocket souvenir for a grandchild later. At a broad square, the lamps form a ring, each one greeting puffs that cross like threads. He works them clockwise. Number 12 resists its side latch stiff from a month of rain. The small wrench warms in his hand, a turn another, and the latch remembers how to be obliging. He tests it 3 times to make future mornings easy. The book receives a line latched, check again Friday. These little conversations between metal and hand are most of the job. A postman appears, leather bag already set straight by habit. He raises 2 fingers by way of greeting and mentions a notice about new burners perhaps arriving next quarter. The lamplighter nods. Change always travels slower than paper. He will meet it when metal arrives, not before. He follows a rise where the street meets a churchyard. The bell there counts the half hour with a voice that knows restraint. Lamps along the wall stand taller than the stone by a head. Birds balance on the finials, as if they had paid for tickets. He snuffs each flame with the same 3-motion measure, and leaves the glass cleaner than his own windows at home. It is a small luxury he allows the parish. Near the market, a costermonger's cart rattles over a stubborn cobble. The lamplighter tilts the pole to let the wheel pass, then checks the post's base again. The chalk mark from last night looks back at him. He presses the toe of his boot into the softened wood and feels the give. It is no worse this morning. The crew will have it righted by the time dusk asks for light. A gentle aside, records matter. The evening notebook is a promise. The morning ledger is its keeping. An untended note becomes a story people tell when they stumble. Tended notes become empty air, which is how streets prefer their tales. By now the sky has chosen day. The last of his lamps along this stretch yields its flame and its small curl of smoke. He stands for a moment with the pole at ease and looks back at the run-glass clear, ventilators open, tap set, hinges speaking the right language. The road looks larger without light, as if it had stretched while people slept. He turns toward the yard where parts wait to be counted and mantles to be rewrapped. A small dog with ideas joins him for a dozen steps, then remembers other duties. At the yard gate, the lamplighter pauses to write 3 lines in the shared book to Mantle's fitted muse, hinge east square number 12, base inspection river corner, and places his folded route page atop the stack for the foreman. He returns the pole to its rack, sets the snuffer bell to cool, and rinses the brush in a bucket that has the patience of tin. Hands washed, he finds a benchware bread, and tea have become their second selves. Comfort without ceremony. The foreman glances over the book, nods once, and circles a line with red pencil so the carpenter's list grows. Noon will bring new orders for glass and screws. Dusk will bring the same measured steps back to the street. The sky practices rain before it commits. A fine, almost pleasant drizzle lays itself on sills and rails, then gathers its mind. The lamplighter listens at his doorway to learn the weather's grammar. Drops on the step, a hush against the window, a distant cart softened by wet stone. He adds a cape to his coat and checks the pole's hood for tightness. A short ladder, ash-gray and smooth with age, rests along the wall. He lifts it with two hands and feels the balance settle across his shoulder. A leather strap slots into place so the ladder rides without arguing. The route alters when water comes. Lamps nearest corners and crossings still lead, but those with shallow hoods get earlier care so mantles won't meet gusts unprepared. He leans the ladder at the first tall post where the bracket sits just above a reach. Boots plant, hands rise, 3 rungs, no hurry. The hook meets the side latch. The pane opens like a book that knows this chapter. Inside, the flame wavers under the rain's breath that sneaks through a vent made to inhale, not to be a door. He lowers the gas a fraction, wipes the inner glass with slow, round strokes, and plucks a small leaf that sailed in and thought to stay. The flame steadies, folds itself into a reliable cone, and forgets the weather for a moment. A gentle aside. Rain is not an enemy to light, but it does press its opinions. Taller lamps need a little less gas. Lower ones benefit from a touch more of wind steals warmth. Cleaning matters more because wet glass eats brightness. A cloth that has learned patience does the most useful work. He climbs down, lifts the ladder with a shoulder roll that offends neither ladder nor shoulder, and walks on. At the next post the latch feels stiff, perhaps from a week of damp. The small wrench warms in his palm to turns, and a drop of oil teaches the hinge to remember yesterday's kindness. He opens, wipes, checks the mantle's slender collar, and closes. A chalk mark at the base tiny triangle whispers to the carpenter, fit a taller hood when supplies allow. Mid-route, the rain finds its confidence. Gutters discover their voices. Puddles choose corners and hold them. The lamplighter steps where stone tells the foot it is safe. Children appear under door lintels, hands cupped around small faces, watching as lights begin to hold the street together. He lifts the pole tip in a greeting that feels like a nod. A father raises a broom to tap water off a shop awning. A line of drops answers like beads. At a narrow lane, 2 lamps face each other like polite cousins. One shows a mantle bruised by last night's wind, a thin crack along the side, brightness to sharp where it should be soft. He closes the tap, waits, and removes the fragile cone into a paper cup made from a folded ledger sheet. A fresh mantle, soft and pale, drops lightly onto the burner collar. He ties the tiny string where the manufacturer asked him to tie it, clips the cap ring in place, opens the tap, and offers a spark. The new mesh learns to glow. He keeps the flame modest until the mantle's voice is even. Glass comes clean under the cloth's gentle circle. He returns the pang and secures the latch. A line goes to the book mantle replaced, laying east and a small dot to remind himself to glance here again on the morning round. Where the street meets the river wall, wind carries rain sideways. He shortens his ladder and shifts to the pole alone, These posts are lower and rarely complain, but water explores wherever it can. He checks vents for nests. Autumn sometimes invites a stray spider to knit a small, clever net. A brush end turns the lace away to a safer corner. A smudge of soot persuades him to draw the narrow brush through twice, then a third time for respect. The flame answers with a comrade. A gentle aside. Some nights bring the faint scent of escaping gas where a joint begins to forget its duty. The lamplighter carries a small brush and a bottle with soap and water. A quick dab makes bubbles if a seam admits more air than it should. He notes the post, tightens what is honest to tighten, and writes a line so the fitter can visit with tools that carry authority. Rain eases. The square collects reflections. The lamps write themselves on the stones in long, soft shapes, like ribbon laid flat. Between two posts, he notices a finial twisted slightly off true. The ladder ascends and rests. His hands find the cool metal, and a quarter turn returns the ornament to its quiet alignment. He rubs a finger along the seam where the top meets the cap. The seal still feels whole. Down again, step by step, the ladder whispered back to the shoulder. A cart brings glass from the yard, wrapped in straw. The delivery man carries a crate to the corner where breakage has been reported. The lamplighter lifts one pane against the daylight. No waves, no bubbles, edges cut square. Good glass is a silent partner. He measures against the frame, eases the old pane out with a careful blade, and beds the new one in a rim of putty that will dry with dignity even in damp. His thumbs leave smooth lines. He wipes where necessary, not more. The latch closes and agrees with the work. The rain chooses to stop, perhaps to watch. He saves to hard repairs for last places, where the day can help if he needs a second pair of hands. One is a bracket that has argued with rust near the base. He braces it with a temporary strap and ties it to the post spine, then chucks a mark a fitter will not miss. The other is a cap that chattered in the wind last night. He adds a small copper shin cut from a bit of flashing, taps it until the cap forgets its chatter, and makes a note for a permanent rivet when the sky decides to change its mind for a week. The workshop calls when the route is calm. Under eaves that know wet weather, the little repair bench waits with its steady lamp, a square of oilcloth, and a smell made of whiting, putty, and dry wood. He sits, places a cracked mantle on the cloth, and studies it like a map. There is no mending for a broken mesh, but he learns why it failed. String tied too tight from a rushed evening, or a small flaw at the collar. He unwinds, discards, and repacks the usable rings and ties into paper tubes for another day. Waste becomes lesson, not sorrow. Glass work goes next. He scores a spare pane with a line even a quiet man can hear, a crisp whisper across the surface. A light pressure from thumbs breaks the glass true. He rubs a breath of oil on the cut edge so it does not complain against the frame later, then rests it in the crate with its cousins. A few chimney vents come in with soot richer than the cloth preferred, warm water, a brush, and patience return them to clear-throated usefulness. He dries each upright so old water cannot leave a mark. A gentle aside. Improvements arrive in pockets of the city. Some posts gain better burners, some get shields that tame wind, some keep their old fittings because budgets are honest things. The lamplighter is impartial. He serves what stands and takes note when change should be invited. Kindly. By late evening, the route is a string of quiet ovals. People walk under them with umbrellas that tick to a common beat. Horses keep their ears where light doesn't glare. A boy balances a loaf and looks up through the bright circle at drops that pass but do not matter. The lamplighter takes his last laddered climb for the night and rests a hand on the warm iron as if to thank it for standing. He gathers strap, cloth, and small tools into their places and turns home. Inside, his cape drips in tidy arcs into the pan set near the door, a habit learned long ago. The satchel is wiped, the pole leaned to its corner, the ladder laid where it can dry without warping. He writes 2 lines in the ledgerine, 6 vents cleared, 1 pane replaced, fittings set quieter, and closes the book with the same measured care he gives a lamp's latch. Market day begins with wood and iron talking in soft ways. Barrows creak, hinges clear their throats, cartwheels explain themselves to cobble. In the lamplighter's yard, the gate opens to a space that smells of tar, soap, and dry rope. Benches wait under a broad awning. Racks keep poles at attention. A crate of mantles sits on a table with a ledger beside it, pencil laid like a bookmark across today's square. The foreman nods, a quiet hack tit that means start where you always start. The lamplighter loosens the twine on the mantel crate. Inside, paper tubes stand like a tidy city. He lifts each by its paper belt, not by the mesh within. The hand learns that lesson once and remembers forever. A sheet of brown paper becomes a counting cloth. He lays mantles in rows of 10, 3 rows to a dozen in the book's arithmetic, because the foreman likes to keep numbers that add neatly at week's end. He weighs a handful on a small brass scale. The pointer agrees with the label. A note goes to the margin, batch even, mesh fine. The crate receives a strip of pasteboard marked with the date. A gentle aside, mantles differ by hairs, breadth, collar size, skirt length, the way the mesh accepts first heat. Workshops prefer a make that forgives weather and hand. A lamplighter notices these small graces the way a tailor notices cloth that drapes without being asked twice. Next comes glass. A case of panes leans against the wall, straw whispering in every seam. He lifts one to the light. It is clear enough to be forgotten once it is set, which is exactly the glass's ambition. He rests a pane on a pad of felt and marks it with a soft grease pencil, 6 by 9 for square globes, 8 by 8 for the round caps that ask for petals more than rectangles. The cutter's wheel sings a brief, crisp line. A thumb's pressure, patient and exact, breaks the pane obediently along the score. Edges meet a stone for a few gentle kisses to remove sharp temper. Each cut pane returns to straw, its corners protected by folded paper triangles that have lived this life before. At the tar bench, a pot of black Japan warms like a quiet pond. Posts that received new iron yesterday need a dress coat that sends rain away politely. He dips a narrow brush and draws even lines along a small collar destined for a river lamp. The brush leaves no ridges, only the kind of finish that keeps hands from catching. The foreman pauses, eyes lowering to watch the stroke, then moving on with a satisfied grunt that in this yard counts as praise. A gentle aside, the yard is a school without a bell. Lessons repeat until muscle keeps them. A tidy bench saves a minute at dusk that a street might need. A polite finish buys a year against weather, as with lamplight. Useful care is made of small consistencies more than of grand gestures. Burners wait in a tray, some old, some new. A sheet of paper pinned to a beam lists changes due. larger jets at 3 windy corners to steady a flame that frets, shielded caps for the hill by the church, new collars to fit the mantles that arrived this week. The lamplighter checks a new burner against its bracket, measures the thread with a gauge that looks like a ring of tiny crowns, and finds the right screw length in a drawer that keeps its compartments labeled by a hand that values quiet afternoons later. He disassembles one older burner to rescue a sound screw and a spring that still knows its job. Parts that can be cleaned go to a bowl of spirits, those that cannot become lessons. He leads the new burner into a bracket and turns it home with a wrench until tight becomes exactly tight, not a whisper more. He notes the post number in the margin of the chain sheet and draws a small square beside it. Later, when the fitting is done in the street, the square will receive a cross and become a kept promise. Near the gate, a young helper stands with a pole not yet stained buyer's hands, clean, eyes listening. Today we'll send him along a short route, 10 lamps that keep to level streets, one gentle hill that teaches breath without complaint. The lamplighter walks him through the bench first, mantles lifted by paper, not mesh, glass held at the edges, not across the field, the snuffer lowered like a lid asking for quiet, not smothering a voice. The boy nods and repeats back the order. Reduce, snuff, air. The words fit his mouth a little awkwardly, the way a new cap meets a brow. They will settle. Out in the yard, a practice post stands on a wooden sled. The lamplighter sets the ladder and has the boy climb only 3 rungs no farther until the feet learn to speak to the ground. Hands on the stiles, not the rungs, knees soft, eyes on the hinge, not on the street below. The pane opens with a click that stops halfway because he must never let it fling. He shows how to rest the pole's hook under the latch when the hand needs to fingers free. The boy copies, breath held, then let out in a small laugh when the latch behaves. A gentle aside. Teaching is a kind of mending. You look for loose habits and snug them before wind finds them. You let confidence grow where it will not rush. A first route is measured in 10 good laps, not in speed. They pack a satchel for the boy, 3 mantles and paper tubes, a brush, the small wrench, the route book with only the first page inked, and a folded cloth that will become his when it has learned the shape of his hand. The lamplighter draws a light map on a card with pencil. Turn left at the bakery, right at the pump, lamps numbered in the order that pleases feet more than it pleases a printed plan. He whispers the reason for this path: you meet corners early, then you give the street to the day. The boy nods as if this were a proverb he has always known. Before they set out, the lamplighter stops at the fitter's bench. A roll of lead tape, a tin of soap water, and a small bottle marked naphtha for stubborn soot go into his own bag. He checks the list on the beam once more: 3 burner swaps, 1 hood to raise by a finger width, 2 panes to fit on the square by the market. He sharpens his pencil with a knife that has served through 4 winters, pockets the stub, and lifts his pole. They walk together to the lane where the boy's 10 lamps begin. The air smells of oranges being quartered at a stall, hot iron from a farrier, and the ghost of last night's rain rising from stone. Dogs mind their own business. Children consider whether to watch. At the first lamp the boy's hands tremble only when he thinks of them. The lamplighter's voice stays low, the volume of a library that likes conversation. Reduce, snuff, air. The flame yields to the snuffer with a neat breath. The hinge opens, the brush moves in a circle that learns itself as it goes, the pane closes, the latch agrees. The boy writes a single word in the book done and smiles, as if he had managed something larger than a pane of glass. A gentle aside, the book is where roots become memory beyond bodies. One day the boy will know his lamps by footsteps and the way wind turns at certain corners. Until then, ink makes a breach. Back at the yard by late morning, the lamplighter fits the new burners to the posts listed, shoulders under a ladder with 2 easy lifts, each change marked with a neat cross on the sheet. Gas whispers different through the new jets. The flame shapes itself with less complaint. He stows old fittings in a crate labeled for salvage and wipes the wrench before it returns to its drawer. The foreman's red pencil circles to finished lines, draws a small arrow to tomorrow's work, and then closes the book with a decisive thump. The yard settles as midday grows. Poles return to their rack like tall, patient soldiers. Cloths hang from pegs, drying into usefulness for tonight. The boy brings back his satchel lighter, and his book heavier by 10 brief entries. He sets the pole down without clatter. The foreman gives him a look that is almost a smile. The lamplighter pours water into a tin mug, hands it over, and points with his chin to the bench. Wrap your mantles again, glass waits for evening. Lessons end as they began, with hands making order. Autumn lengthens evenings the way a tailor lets out a seam. The sun decides to rest earlier, and lamps answer by waking sooner. Notices appear at the yard on blue paper. Winter schedule begins Monday, corners first, mews last, check vents for fallen leaves, carry extra mantles. The lamplighter copies the new start times into his pocketbook, not because he'll forget, but because writing steadies the mind for longer nights. He leaves up the coat with the warmer lining and oils the pole's fittings so cold won't stiffen them. The cap gains a woolen band under the leather brim. In his satchel, mantles double. The brush grows softer with use and asks for replacing, but he keeps it 1 more month because it still remembers his grip. A bit of wax string and 2 extra screws join the small wrench. The ladder strap has been restitched with a thicker thread. He runs a thumb along it, approving of work that will not show but will hold. The first week of earlier rounds carries a pleasing hush. Shops keep their shutters a little longer. Windows light from within like beeswax candles behind frosted panes. The lamplighter begins at the hill, where wind plays at being unkind until it remembers it has other places to be. The vents have gathered curled elm leaves. He teases them free with the brush end and pockets them, for they will only return if left to their own opinions. At the church corner, steam lifts from a grating like breath. He reduces the gas a hair there, because warmth helps the mantle hold shape. A gentle aside, winter asks for steadier adjustment. Gas thickens slightly in cold mains, flame answers more slowly. A lamplighter learns patience measured in half breaths. He opens, waits, then chooses how much to open. Lamps, like people, prefer politeness when the air is sharp. The boy with the new root, no longer quite new, meets him at the square to compare notes. He has ink on a knuckle and the satisfied look of someone whose hands and feet have become acquaintances. 2 mantles in the alley off Harrow Lane, he says, and the lamplighter nods. They check the spares and agree on an order for the evening. Corners, crossing mews, then the riverward posts where frost clings a heartbeat longer. The boy folds his route card the way the older man folds maps, quieter now because paper yields best to calm fingers. Mid-month brings a different notice on heavier stocked change of fittings at 3 posts. New burners promised better against wind. And a single line that means more than it declares. Trial of electric on the market lamp. Saturday at 6 of the evening. The lamplighter reads it twice. He is not troubled. Streets collect changes the way trees collect seasons, slow, then suddenly. His duty is the same: arrive, attend, and take notes honest enough that the foreman's red pencil has easy work. Saturday holds the kind of cold that carries a clean edge. He begins the circuit earlier, making sure the lamps nearest the market are tidy long before the hour. The globes show no smears, the vents are clear, the burners sing a steady vowel when the tap opens. People gather by the stall where apples shine like small lanterns of their own. Children stand too close to their breath just to see the ghost of it. The electric men arrive with a coil of cable like a sleeping serpent, and a wooden box that clicks to itself when bumped. They nod at him, a shared trade nod, neither rivalry nor ceremony. He tips his cap and tends to more posts while wires think about their task. At 6, the market lamp tallest in the square does not wait for a flame. It blooms from a switch with a paler, steadier light, not sharp, only different. The ring of gas lamps answers with their softer color, somewhere between bread crust and honey. People look up, not with surprise so much as with interest, the way they would regard a new baker's loaf beside the old, each slice holding its own reasons. The lamplighter checks the line his lamps make across the cobbles. They still teach the feet where to go. He marks a line in his book: electric trial, market post lit, neighboring gas steady, no chatter and wind, and moves on. A gentle aside, a lamplighter's pride survived change by becoming usefulness. If one lamp retires, hands still care for 100 others. If a square brightens by wire, alleys still ask for breath and cloth. The city keeps more lights than any one kind can supply. That same week a single post earns a retirement. The foot is new ironed, the bracket shines with fresh black. The hood's lines carry a fitter's pleased hand. But the lantern itself, the square case that held 1,000 evenings, has a crack at the crown that mending cannot teach to forget. The foreman chooses market morning for the change, when people can see without gathering. The lamplighter arrives early to clean the glass one last time. He wipes the pane with the grave patience he gives a final task, taking care at the corners where dust likes to defend itself. He awes the latch so it opens without protest, then closes it and listens to the small click, storing the sound somewhere behind the chest, where work becomes memory. The carpenters arrive with a crate and a new lantern wrapped inside. They lift the old gently, as if it could feel the courtesy. Children watch from behind a bench. A woman with parcels pauses to shift weight from one arm to the other. The old lantern comes down, the new meets the bracket, and accepts its bolts without fuss. The lamplighter checks the seal, trims the mantle's collar, opens the tap, gives the spark, and the new glass receives light that behaves like a newcomer in a friendly shop, quiet, respectful, finding its place. He writes the words in the book old served and tucks the pencil away. Frost arrives by the end of the month. Ladders learn to ask for careful feet. Boots acquire a different conversation with stone. He keeps sand in a small sack to pinch onto rungs if they hint at mischief. Before dawn, the air smells of coal and clean cold. He warms his hands on a mug while memorizing the day's small repairs. Tap shim at the Pump Street hinge. Check at number 12. Amuse lamp that needs a taller hood by and by. Light appears later now. The snuffer greets flames longer into morning. He lets each breath lengthen his steps instead of shortening them. On the last evening of the season changed, the boy finishes his 10 lamps, while a thin crescent hangs above the roofs. Together they walk the market square once more. Electric still hums at the tall post like a kettle that never quite boils. The gas lamps offer their familiar speech. The two kinds do not argue. They only share the work. The lamplighter shows the boy the chalk marks that guide carpenters and fitters and explains again how notes become kept promises. The boy, less boy now, writes his own careful line route quiet, wind from east, glass clear, and closes his book without snapping it. Back at the yard, the lamplighter sets his satchel on the bench and turns the snuffer bell upside down to dry. He rubs a little oil into the pole's hook and folds the letter strap along its memory. The foreman's red pencil circles 3 finished lines and draws an arrow into next month. The lamplighter hangs his coat where the lining can remember warmth and takes a last look at the rack spoles straight, cloths hanging, glass cut and stacked. The day has acquired a winter length. He lets it be what it is. If your breathing has matched these seasonal adjustments, surer steps, steadier hands, small goodbyes, let it stay even. We will leave the lamps to their winter duty and walk inward to a room of clay and reeds, where signs learn to stand in order beneath a teacher's quiet eye. And as the lamps keep their patient watch outside, let's step into the cool shade of a tablet house along a wide river, where damp clay waits for morning lessons and a reed stylus learns the shapes of thought. Morning gathers first along the river, then in the narrow lane that leads to the tablet house. The door is open to the cool air. Inside, the floor is covered with reed mats that have learned to lie flat after many seasons. A low shelf holds jars of water, a basket of reeds tied with twine, and a shallow wooden trough where yesterday's clay sleeps under damp cloth. The room smells of wet earth, straw, and the faint sweetness of oil rubbed into wood. A boy arrives with his small bundle of cord-wrapped cloth for wiping hands, a short knife for cutting reeds, and a tiny cylinder seal he keeps in a pouch at his neck. He sets these things in their places without thinking about them. Habit is the first teacher. He lifts the damp cloth and presses his thumbs into the clay. It yields. Not too soft, not stiff. He pinches a portion into his palm and begins to knead, turning the lump slowly, guiding out the bubbles with the heel of his hand. The motion is steady, the way one might coax a knot from rope. He sets the clay down and wets his fingertips from the jar, then resumes. The clay cools his skin and gives a faint, clean sound as it folds. At the lintel, the teacher appears. His robe hangs simply, the color of river silt after rain. He carries a reed stylus worn to a comfortable edge and a small board of hardened clay with a few signs impressed in clean, shallow wedges. He sets the board on the front table and tilts it toward the children. They gather by order of age, older students near the front, younger ones along the side. No one speaks loudly. Work makes its own quiet. The teacher taps the board twice with his stylus. Today's model signs are simple and good for warming the hand: the sign for barley, the sign for house, the sign for water. He speaks each slowly, letting the shape sit in the room before the sound follows. The children repeat, not in chorus, but close enough to be together. The reed tips rest in their fingers like small birds that have agreed to perch there. A gentle aside, the tablet house the Ediba teaches more than writing. Numbers, lists, weights, and measures live here too. Kettle counts, jars of oil, baskets of grain, wages tallied by days. The script's wedges carry not only words, but arrangements that make trade and memory behave. The boy greets his small piece of clay. With the side of his palm he shapes it into a rounded rectangle, then flattens one face with light taps. He checks the thickness by eye and by habit rests one edge against the table to see if it stands without sagging. It does. He sets it flat again and smooths the surface with the damp cloth in 3 easy passes. The clay grows quiet, its small ridges softened into readiness. Now the reed. He chooses one from the basket, not the greenest, not the oldest. A reed that remembers last season's wind is best. He tests its spring against his thumb. With the knife he cuts the tip at a shallow angle, then trims a second facet so the wedge will have a tidy point. A small notch at the back lets his index finger find the same place every time. He presses the stylus into the clay's edge to test. The wedge comes out clean, the angles crisp, the corners neither split nor muddy. He wipes the reed on his cloth and breathes. The teacher moves among the mats. His spare hand lifts, not to scold, but to guide. He turns a wrist here, adjusts a grip there, reminds one student to keep the stylus leaning at the same angle. The wedges like to agree with each other. He pauses beside the boy and touches the corner of the tablet with a finger. "Room," he says. The boy nods and leaves a neat margin so signs can stand without crowding. He begins with barley. The first wedge presses in and lifts away, leaving a small, bright impression. The second wedge meets the first at a measured angle. He counts in his head press, lift, breathe so the strokes do not jostle. The sign takes its place the way a seed takes the furrow. He copies the teacher's model again below, a little smaller, then once more, a little better. The clay accepts each line with patient grace. From the back of the room, older students recite a list from memory, a string of professions, a string of birds, a string of jars, and their sizes. The sound is like a low river over stones, steady, almost musical, never hurried. One boy rolls his cylinder seal across a practice tablet to test the carving. The pattern blooms a lion, a palm, a rope border, and then he smooths the clay again. Because the seal is for finish work, not for this moment. A gentle aside, cylinder seals are signatures that travel. They live on strings or on the neck, in small pouches, in the folds of tunics. When rolled across damp clay, they make a repeated picture that says, "This is mine." And I saw this done. Even a child's practice seal speaks of a future where his marks will be trusted. The teacher returns to the board and adds to new signs. The class leans forward, the way sunflowers lean when the light shifts. He explains how the wedge angles relate, not with long sentences, but with the stylus itself. Touch here, turn here, leave a breath of space. He sets the board down again and lifts a small, already hardened tablet from a shelf. It holds a neat list written by a student who finished last season. The marks are even, almost calm to the eye. He passes it around. Hands receive it with care as if it could bruise. The boy works on the sign for house. His first attempt crowds the left margin. He flips the tablet over and smooths a fresh face with the cloth. This is not waste, it is the way clay forgives. He begins again, leaving room for the sign's roof and its steady side lines. The wedge angles line up better this time, and the spaces between them feel like deliberate pauses in a well-told sentence. He adds water necks, the sign composed of strokes that like to flow. By the third copy, the clay no longer resists. It seems as pleased with the order as he is. A jar knocks softly against another jar at the shelf, someone refilling a bowl used for dampening cloths. The window admits a slice of daylight that turns the suspended dust to gold. Past the threshold, the city begins to warm. Donkey steps, a vendor calling gates in a voice that knows both bargain and kindness. The dull ring of a bronze weight set on a scale. Inside, the tablet house keeps to its rhythm, which is neither the market's haste nor the temple's chant. It is the pace of hands and signs learning to agree. Mid-morning brings a short rest. The children fold their legs under them and flex their fingers. The teacher sharpens 3 reeds in quick, sure cuts, dropping the trimmed ends into a small dish. He pours a little water over the dish to keep the fibers from flying. He sets to fresh tablets on the front table, one with numbers for measures of barley, one with a simple receipt, so and so received so many jars of oil. He taps the first line of each. Older students will copy the receipt, younger ones will practice the numbers and their tiny grouping wedges. The boy touches his cylinder seal again where it rusts at his neck, then lets it fall back into the pouch. He moistens his cloth, turns his tablet to a new face, and draws a shallow guide line with the stylus, not a mark to remain, but a path for spacing. He begins the numbers, small and neat, stacking wedges like grains in a basket. He finds that counting by 5s helps his breath. Press, press, press. Lift, breathe. The pattern settles into him. A gentle aside. Clay records are both strong and soft. Fresh tablets can be reshaped, corrected, smoothed, and tried again. Tablets for keeping are dried hard in the air or near a slow fire. Important ones are baked until they forget water. The room's shelves tell both stories, rows that can still be touched and rows that ring faintly when a fingernail taps them. The rest ends. The teacher moves through the room, sometimes standing behind a student to watch a handwork, sometimes kneeling so his eye and the tablet share the same horizon. He offers a new list for afternoon and a promise. If your hands are steady now, the brush and ink will be happy later, by which he means that writing on papyrus or leather or smooth wood will come easier if the wedges are good today. The boy finishes his numbers and copies the sign for house once more at the bottom right, leaving space as he was taught. He lifts the tablet to the light to check the surface sheen. No pooling moisture. No cracks. He sets it on a reed mat to rest. The clay darkens as air makes its quiet bargain with it. Midday moves softly over the street. Light brightens the doorway but does not disturb the room's shade. The air is warmer now, and the clay responds by loosening just enough to welcome the stylus without sagging. The teacher sets a shallow basket on the front table, 3 small jars, a coil of string, a handful of smooth river pebbles, and a dish of damp clay formed into neat pellets the size of plums. Alongside these he places a wooden board incised with straight grooves, each groove ready to hold pebbles that stand for measures. He taps the board with his stylus. Today we count as the granary counts, he says, voice even. Jars in, jars out. Numbers that agree. He draws a short line down the board's edge and rests a single pebble in the first groove. 1, he says, not loudly. Another pebble joins it. 2, the children know their numbers, but the board shows how they live on a line, each place holding what the mind might drop. A gentle aside. Before signs filled tablets, people counted with tokens and pebbles, Over time, tokens met clay envelopes, and seals told who promised what. The tablet house keeps the later method. Yet the older language of pebbles still helps young hands understand. The older students bring from a shelf a basket of tablet blanks prepared earlier, small rectangles already smooth, edges slightly lifted like shallow trays. The teacher passes them around and nods toward the jars. "Or received," he says, placing a pebble for 5 into the second groove, then 2 single pebbles beside it. 7. He turns a damp clay pellet in his hand and presses a loop of string into it, leaving 2 ends free. "Seal next," he adds, and shapes the pellet into a neat plug that will sit over a jar's knotted tie. The boy takes up his tablet and draws a faint guide for spacing, the way he learned in the morning. He writes the day's simple header merchant item, number each wedge set gently, not carving, just persuading. He glances at the board, 5 and 2. On the second line he copies the numeral groups, small and con. His reed leaves clean corners. He breathes between signs, not between strokes, so each sign arrives as a whole. At the front, the teacher demonstrates the sealing. He slips a cord around a jar's neck, draws it snug, and ties a knot. A small lump of damp clay sits over the knot like a patient eye. "Name," he says, offering his cylinder seal. He rolls it across the lump with steady pressure, and the carved scene wakes in the clay: a lion turning its head, a palm tree, a border of tiny rope. He taps the tablet, record agrees with seal. Then he lifts the jar a little and sets it back, the small weight telling the hand that the knot and seal now keep company. A gentle aside: seals do more than decorate. They say someone took care, someone will be asked later, and this jar knows its story. The rolling is slow on purpose. Haste blurs the tale. The class works in pairs. One student reads the receipts the teacher calls out. The other writes. The boy listens. 3 baskets of barley, 1 jar of oil. He copies the barley mark and the number, then the oil mark, and its small, firm 1. The older girl beside him leans over to check his spacing. "Leave a breath here," she whispers, and points to the margin. He nods and moves the last sign a half wedge over. The line looks easier now, as if it is not holding its breath. From the lane outside comes the soft slap of sandals and the dry rattle of palm fronds tied for shade. A vendor calls figs in a voice that blends with the noon air. Inside, a fly circles the rim of a water jar and then changes its mind. The teacher pours a little water into the trough to refresh the clay and covers it with the cloth again. He touches the rim with his finger to test coolness. Still good. Now returns, he says, and changes the groove board with a practiced sweep of pebbles. 2 groups remove, 1 left to show what remains. Right given back, he adds. And several styluses move in unison, leaving a soft, collective ticking, the sound of tools that refuse to hurry. The boy's tablet fills its face. He turns it and smooths the next side with his cloth. A few students stand to carry finished tablets to the sill. The sill is a long, sun-warmed shelf just outside the door, sheeted by a woven mat. It receives the day's work like a compost, warm enough to stiffen clay, not hot enough to crack it. The boy waits his turn, holding his tablet on both palms. The surface looks even, the signs keep their edges. At the sill, he sets it down among others, each resting on a reed strip so air can pass beneath. The tablets darken slightly as moisture thinks its way out. A gentle aside: Drying is also a kind of editing. If a sign sags, the tablet returns for correction. If it holds, the day moves it toward its future, either a shelf in a cool room or a slow fire that makes it forget water forever. Back inside, the teacher lifts a wooden tray with hollow cups carved into it. Each cup holds a small clay bulla, a hollow ball with tiny tokens sealed inside. He rattles one gently. It murmurs. Old method, he says. Before tablets like ours, these watched the tokens and kept them honest. He rolls his seal across a fresh lump, lets it dry a little, and then breaks it open to show the idea. Tokens in, seal outside, story kept. He lays the broken halves where all can see. Now we write. The writing is the tokens and the envelope together. The boy bends again to his tablet. The teacher calls a new entry. Brewer received 2 jars of barley mash. The boy copies the brewer's sign crescent and wedge end writes the number. He draws a short divider line, a habit the teacher likes. When someone reads this later, eyes will find their way. He imagines the brewer's courtyard, a cool place with shallow jars set in rows, and the idea helps his hand keep a moderate pace. Older students move to a side table for weights. A bronze weight shaped like a duck watches as they balance it with pebbles and small stones to learn how measures speak across scales. The teacher assigns one of them to read list items to the room, his voice low and even. For baskets to the baker, 1 returned, 3 remain, wedges follow, pebbles migrate, seals press their quiet pictures. The boy pauses to give his reed a trim. The knife's edge whispers, a new facet gives the wedge a cleaner nose. He tests on the tablet's edge. The mark is crisp. He wipes the reed, sets it back to the same notch for grip, and continues. His line about the brewer finishes with a small space left, the way a path leaves room for a turn. Heat in the lane nudges the air, a slight current passes through the doorway and lifts the edge of the cloth over the trough. The boy replaces it and smooths the fold. Clay sleeps better when covered. He returns to his place, now copying a small table of conversions the teacher has set on the board, how many small measures gather into a larger one. He writes slowly, keeps the columns straight, and bookmarks the thought with a tiny wedge in the corner, a habit he has borrowed from an older student who always seems to find her way back to the right spot. A gentle aside, colophons and corner marks will one day note who wrote a tablet for whom and when. For now, small habits, tidy margins, consistent spacing teach the same respect. At last the teacher lifts his palm. Hands rest. Students lay their reeds beside their work. He walks to the doorway and looks at the sill. The earliest tablets have stiffened enough to move. He gestures, and the boy joins 2 others to carry them to the inner shelf, where they will wait until someone needs them or until a slow fire finishes their journey. He feels the faint warmth in each tablet's body. Signs gleam a little, as if pleased to have kept their shapes. The lesson closes with a quiet routine. Reeds return to the basket, tips up. Cloths rinse and hang. Pebbles slide from grooves back into a small leather bag. The board receives a wipe with a dry hand, not a wet one. The jar's cords are loosened and retied for practice, not plug. Roll the seal with even pressure. The boy's cylinder seal makes its simple pattern, modest but clear. Afternoon gathers without hurry. Heat settles into the walls, and the tablet house breathes a little slower. The teacher draws the door curtain half over the opening so light rests on the floor in a softer band. He brings out a flat tray with 4 narrow tablets, the kind used for detallies. Their edges are raised slightly, not decoration, just a gentle fence to keep fingers from sliding. He taps a heading onto the board. Days of work owed, days of work paid. The stylus marks are plain, the kind you can read from across the room. Wages in days, he says. Barley for time. Names first, numbers after. He writes a model line beneath. A worker's name, 5 small wedges, 4 days earned, to 4 days given, 3 remaining. He leaves space between each set so eyes will not stumble. A gentle aside. Many lists here do not pay in coins but in grain or oil measured against time. The marks make fairness visible. They also help memory do less labor than it would need to do alone. The boy receives one of the narrow tablets. Its surface feels cool, as if it cared to help. He smooths a breath of moisture across it with his cloth, just enough to welcome the read, not enough to soften the edges already made. He sets a margin with 2 light guide touches that will rub out later. His first line holds the sign for a name. He knows a man who sweeps the temple steps, followed by the day wedges, then the little group for barley paid. His hand leaves a small pause before the remainder. The line looks like a sentence spoken with patience. Across the room, the older students share a longer board. They draw columns for several workers and a final column for balance carried. One of them murmurs the numbers while another writes, a duet of low sound and steady hands. The teacher moves among them, posture easy, watching for tilts that will wander or wedges that crowd. He corrects with the reed itself, turning a grip or breathing on a finger to remind it not to press. From the lane comes a distant clatter and a smell of wet rushes laid out to dry. The tablet house keeps its cool, but thoughts travel to the courtyard outside where the brewer's jars are set in rows. The teacher nods at 2 students. Brewer's note, he says. Take your boards and the seal lump. We will meet in the court. The boy is chosen to go. The older girl from the numbers joins in. They carry a small tray with a pellet of damp clay, a length of cord, and a spare reed in case the first grows tired. The courtyard is shaded by woven mats. Jars stand half buried for coolness. The brewer, sleeves rolled, greets them with a balanced glance between friendliness and business. He lifts a jar lid so the scent rises, grain and time fades sweetness. Work recorded by smell? To jars received, he says, pointing to the line he sent earlier. He rests his hand near the jar's rim, not touching the liquid, letting the cool rise meet his skin. The boy sets his narrow tablet on a low bench, checks the line he'd prepared before, and adds the brewer's mark with care. He writes the number again to jars, then the sign for received. The older girl ties the cord neatly around the neck and molds the small clay plug over the knot. She offers her cylinder seal vines and a small burden roll across the surface, neat and even. The brewer watches the pressure and nods once when he sees it is honest. A quiet agreement settles among them. A gentle aside records travel in both directions, what leaves the storeroom, what arrives at a courtyard, what returns. Each place keeps its own part of the story, so when tales meet later, they sit together without friction. They return to the tablet house by the narrow lane where a water seller moves with his bell and a clay cup. The boy carries his tablet with 2 hands, elbows in, as he has been shown. Inside, the teacher checks the line, looking not only at the signs, but at the spacing. Clear, he says, and sets the tablet on the warm sill to begin its drying. The seal lump goes to the tray. The cord returns to its loop. The routine folds itself up as simply as it unfolded. Back at the mats, wage lists continue. The boy completes 3 lines, then turns the narrow tablet and prepares its reverse. He copies a small colophon the teacher indicated, nothing more than a date and a brief note of purpose. Later in life, full colophons will add the scribe's name and the overseer's. For now, the modest end mark is enough to tell tomorrow where today left off. The teacher lifts a wooden latch and opens a side door. Cooler air spills from a small inner room. Shelves, he says, and gestures. The class rises quietly. The cool room holds 2 walls of earthen shelves, each one fitted with low ridges so tablets lie without sliding. Their surfaces range from soft-dried to fully baked. Some bear string tags, some are stacked in shallow trays by subject grain, oil, labor offerings. The place smells of clay that has forgotten river water and of baskets woven so long ago they have become almost part of the room. The boy walks between the shelves with the respect his feet learned at the temple. He reads a few edges, the top line of a list, a name, a number, then sets his afternoon tablets where the teacher points. A narrow space remains at the end of the row. The teacher places a small wedge chip there, broken from an old practice tablet, to keep the order's memory if someone jostles the shelf. A gentle aside, archives do not shout. They model a kind of quiet that helps thinking. In a hot city, a cool room is more than comfort. It is a promise the marks will hold their shapes. The teacher opens a shallow basket with cord handles. Inside are tablets that belong to the temple granary, due to be carried across the street. He chooses 2 students to be runners. They balance the basket between them, one hand holding the handle, the other steadying the side. The teacher notes their names on a scrap of hardened clay with a quick series of wedges who carried, when then sets the scrap to dry on a little shelf set only for such tickets. The boy watches the neatness of it and feels the idea settle in him. Every motion leaves a small, useful wake. Back in the main room, the afternoon's air has softened. A breeze lifts the edge of the curtain at the door. The class returns to their mats for one last piece of work, copying a short proverb set by the teacher on the board in morning hand. The lines are simple, about patience, about the way small streams fill a canal. Each student writes without hurry, signs arranged with space to breathe. The boy's wedges line lightly, steadier now than they were at dawn. He sets his finished proverb next to the wage list on the sill. The earlier tablets have firmed enough to move. He carries them to the inner shelf, feeling their slight change in weight and sound a faint dryness now when they touch the reed slots. He places them where the teacher's hand indicates, then stands a moment listening to the quiet clay coolness, light in a long rectangle on the floor. A gentle aside, some days end with fire. The slow hearth in a side court bakes tablets chosen for longer keeping. The room honors both fates air-dried for the season's business, fire-hardened for stories that must outlast weather and memory. As the lesson closes, the teacher has them tidy what hands have used. Reeds are sorted by length with tips upward so they dry without warping. Cloths are rinsed and hung unclipped so the weight falls evenly. The trough is covered, not tightly, only enough to keep the clay from thinking it is night. The groove board receives its pebbles, then upon smoothing that says until tomorrow. The boy slides his cylinder seal back into its pouch and ties the cord with a small practice knot. He looks at his hands and sees lines of clay in the creases. He wipes them without rubbing hard. He feels a mild, companionable tiredness, the kind that follows a day spent arranging signs that agree. The tablet house steps across the lane into the temple granary as a guest who knows the rooms. A low gate opens to a wide court shaded by woven mats. On one side, a long bean scale hangs from a stock frame, its cords dark with oil, its bronze pans polished by years of grain's small granite kiss. Near it sits a shelf of standard weight stucks and lions cast in bronze, stones bound in netting, each marked with a tiny sign. The air smells of straw, cloth, and the faint sweetness that barley keeps even in silence. The teacher nods to the granary keeper, an older woman with sleeves tied back and a measuring scoop that knows the inside of many jars. She points with her chin toward two sacks resting by the scale. Arrived at noon, she says, and the sun moved farther than their measures did. Her voice is steady, not cross, only stating what the room must soon agree upon. Two porters stand nearby, hands at their belts, eyes a little eager to be told they have done well. The boy and the older girl set their tablets on a low bench. He draws a shallow margin and writes the day, the granary mark, and a slow line for receipts. The older girl molds a modest lump of damp clay into plugs ready for knots. The teacher reviews the standard weights with a touch-stuck lion stone, then lifts the bean scale with two fingers to feel its temper. Balanced, honest. A gentle aside, scales speak a language of patient gravity. They prefer hands that set, wait, and watch. A good weight bears a small scar or two, not from neglect, but from long years of being asked for truth. The first sack rises to the pan with the help of a rope. Grain hushes within like sand in a tide pool. The keeper sets a duck weight heavier than it looks on the opposite pan. The bean tilts. She adds a smaller stone, then another. The bean nods, then steadies on its center mark, not quite still, only agreeing softly. The teacher bends so his eye shares the bean's horizon. Right, he says, and the boy records weight and measure groups on his tablet, each wedge waiting for the last to settle before being placed. The keeper lifts a handful from the sack and lets it slip back, eyes on the ratio of full kernels to broken ones. She nods once. Good, she says, and the older girl makes the receiving knot. Setting the clay plug over it like a quiet lid, she rolls the granary seal across its sheaths, and a gate then steps back so the impression can breathe. The second sack troubles the air a little. One porter shifts his foot, the other sets his jaw. On the beam, the sack stands a feather shy of the mark that its rope tag promised. The keeper does not hurry. She adds a small stone and watches the beam continue to prefer the weight side. The teacher lifts a tin cup and pours into it a measure from the sack. The beam lifts and lowers its ends as if thinking, but does not consent. The porters look not at each other but at the rope tag, as if the knot had written something it now denies. The teacher raises a hand. We sample, he says. He takes the standard scoop, its sides rubbed to a silk dullness by years of grain, and dips twice from different corners of the sack. The keeper brings a shallow tray. Grain spreads in a single layer under his palm. He brushes aside chaff with the slow curve of his hand, counts damaged kernels with a voice that barely leaves his mouth, and sets them at the tray's edge. He presses his cylinder seal into a small chip of clay and sets it beside the count. The boy writes on his tablet, sampled, proportioned fair, weight short by small measure. He leaves a space for resolution. A gentle aside, not every quarrel is a quarrel. Most are simply two Timmings kneading when a sack left the field, and when it reached the scale. Son and heir eat weight while they work their changes. Marks are the bridge that puts everyone's feet on the same plank. The keeper decides. We accept with remarks, she says. Porters make up on next load. No blame, just a path forward. The boy writes the line that makes the decision visible. The older girl adds a small second plug of clay to the sack's nut and rolls the keeper's seal across it crosswise, a sign that a note stays with this load. The porters exhale like men who have kept a promise as best as time allowed. They lift the next sack from the cart without argument. The afternoon lengthens. The bean scale speaks in small arcs. The boy's tablet fills with measured lines the curve of a day-given shape. Between entries he wipes the reed, trims it once, and tests its nose on the tablet's edge. The bronze weights warm slightly in the sun, but their truth does not change. A cat moves along the wall like poured shadow and sits where barley scent promises a later visitor. A runner arrives with a shallow basket from the tablet house, a ticket chipped in the teacher's morning hand hanging from its cord. The keeper signs it with her seal, the runner rolls his own across the reverse, and the boy notes the exchange. He feels without thinking that his wedges have joined a larger circle doorway to granary, to shelves, and back. The circle does not close to shut anything in, it closes to hold. As the day slows, the teacher asks for a tally of work paid. The boy prepares a narrow tablet and copies from the morning list, today's worth of grain given to a laborer, one to a carpenter mending a granary hinge, half day to a mat weaver whose shade has lasted more summers than anyone bothers to count aloud. The older girl checks each line against the keeper's palm notes, small scores made with reed on a smooth plank. Agreement pleases all three of them the way a level beam pleases the eye. A gentle aside, some tablets travel to the fire before they travel to the shelf. Heat makes a mark that rain cannot persuade. The choice of which to bake and which to keep soft is itself a kind of writing, one that speaks to how long a story is expected to be needed. The hearth in the outer court is ready, no blaze, only a low agreed heat fed with dung cakes and thin sticks. The keeper lays 3 tablets on the warm brick, supported on thin reeds so the bottoms breathe. The boy watches the surfaces lighten slightly at the edges as moisture walks away in small steps. The teacher turns them after a time with a stick. The sound they make when tapped with a fingernail changes from damp to a soft ring, not glass, not stone, just clay that has chosen to remember. Toward evening, light takes on the color of bread just pulled from a slow oven. The courtyard brightens and softens at once. The seal plugs on the jars shine a little where the seal's lines collect shadow. The cat blinks longer. Dust hangs in the air like a thought that has decided to sit down. The boy writes the last line of the day's receipt and draws a small, neat divider, his way of telling the future reader where the evening began. They carry finished tablets to the cool room across the lane. Inside, the air meets skin like a drink of water. The boy slides today's work into its row, a quiet addition to many quiet additions. He sets the baked tablets at the back where baskets will not jostle them, and the air will not argue them into softer memory. The chip that marked the shelves and moves to make space. Order flexes, order holds. Outside, A bell sounds from the river path where traders close their boats. The tablet house unwinds its day. Reeds are set upside down to dry, cloths hung along the wall, the trough of clay smooth and covered with a clean, damp fold. The teacher wipes the board with the side of his hand until only a friendly ghost of signs remains. He looks around as if counting without numbers mats flat, jars capped pebbles in their bag and nods once. The boy touches the pouch at his neck, feeling the cylinder seal's small weight. He is not thinking of lions or vines, only of the way the bean found its center, the way the plug kept the knot honest, and the way a line on clay turned talk into something that could be set on a shelf and trusted after sleep. Evening gathers, as if someone drew a calm line across the sky and let color deepen below it. The lane outside the tablet house quiets. Traders fold mats, a last jar thuds into place. Sandals speak in softer syllables. Inside, the teacher opens the door curtain to let dusk visit the room. The floor's reed mats hold the day's shape without complaint. On the front table, the hardened model board waits, its wedges still bright after many seasons. He lifts a narrow lamp from a niche and sets a small flame to the wick. The light is steady but modest, more companion than command. Reading, he says, and the class settles into a circle that leaves space for breath between every pair of shoulders. Older students take tablets from the inner shelf, wage tallies, receipts, a brief list of offerings, each choosing something they did not write. So the mouth meets no work with fresh care. A gentle aside, reading aloud returns a mark to the ear that first shaped it. The ear tests what the eye thought it had already approved. Where a pause is missing, sound notices. Where a sign tilts, sense tugs its sleeve. The first reader speaks low. His tablet holds the afternoon tally from the granary court. He names the keepers, the sacks, the weight groups, the remark about sun and loss, the promise for the next delivery. The teacher follows with his eyes, not his finger. When the boy hesitates at a tight spacing, the teacher says only, "Leave room next time for the word to sit, no scold." The lesson lands softly. The boy with the cylinder seal at his neck receives his own turn with a tablet. He did not make a list of workers and days given. He reads each line as the marks request, not rushing ahead, not stretching the vowels thin. Numbers sit in the voice like pebbles that have found their places in a groove. When he finishes, he looks up without a question, but the teacher answers one anyway. "Good," he says. Your breath kept the columns straight. From the sill, the last of the air-dried tablets come in, firm enough to bear a thumb's light on their edges. A shallow tray holds 3 chosen for the hearth to receipts needed beyond the season, and a proverb copied with care by a student who is leaving for a trader's counting room next month. The teacher lights the courtyard fire to a low, obliging heat and sets the tray where warmth passes through it like a slow idea. A faint clay scent returns, clean and almost sweet. Back at the table, the teacher places a fresh, smooth tablet in front of the boy, the one who measured barley, and watched a bean find the middle. "Colophon," he says, as if naming a simple food. He turns the hardened model board to show a small closing pattern. Day, purpose, who made, who checked. "Short," he adds, tapping each part with the stylus. "Enough to bring you back later, even if you have forgotten your own footsteps." The boy breathes once and sets his tablet on a folded cloth so it will not wobble. He trims his reed to a crisp facet and tests it. The first wedge writes the day sign, its angles clean, its tail neither timid nor proud. Next he impresses the purpose received and weighed at the temple store. He leaves a narrow space the width of a fingernail, then writes his name in the form students use, child of so-and-so, of the tablet house under such and such teacher, because modesty sits well in a school. Last, he adds the teacher's mark, not the seal, just a tidy sign that means checked. The line reads back to him with a small, satisfying balance. A gentle aside, a colophon is a door left on the hinge. Future hands can open it and see who prepared the path and where it was meant to go. It does not boast, it remembers. When he lifts the tablet, the wedges shine a little like wet linen. He sets it near the sill, not on it, to let the surface firm before it joins the others. The teacher leans close and nods without words. The boy releases a breath he did not know he was holding. Outside, the river sounds like cloth being wrung once and then smoothed. The air carries a coolness that the room accepts the way a jar accepts water. The lamp's small flame keeps its shape. Its light lays a soft coin on each student's wrist. The teacher speaks again. Tickets, he says, and from a small basket draws hardened chips with rough edges, the day's runners, the granary tally, the hearth bake. He arranges them in a line and reads them like a sentence. Carried, returned, sealed, baked. The order pleases the eye. He slides them into a shallow tray marked with a simple sign done. The hearth tablets receive a turn. Their surfaces have changed tone. A fingernail tapped gently hears a new answer, firm and fine, neither hollow nor dull. He lifts them with a flat stick to a back brick, where warmth continues without asking for attention. A child from the youngest row watches long enough to learn the sound, and then returns to her mat as if she had learned a word that will be hers next year. The class ends with the small ceremony of putting away. Each reed dries tip up in its jar. Cloths hang by their corners so their own weight can draw them straight before morning. The groove board receives its pebbles, and someone who likes neatness shakes the leather bag once so the stones settle to the bottom and will not tomorrow. The trough of clay is smooth covered and patted as people pat a patient animal's shoulder. The teacher stands at the doorway and looks not far, just to the sill and the inner room. Shelves hold the day's lines in rows like planted fields. All the marks feel unhurried, honest. Even when they describe a shortage or a delay, he lowers the curtain to half, a signal to the lane that the room is folding itself into evening. The boy ties his seal's cord with a small knot that now comes without thought. He slips the pouch inside his tunic where warmth will keep the clay from growing brittle. He picks up his colophon tablet and, under the teacher's eye, sets it on the sill's reed strip. He will move it to the cool shelf before he goes, but for a few breaths he wants to watch dampness leave it gently, not as steam only as the smallest forgetting. A gentle aside, night helps memory in another way. When work pauses, the day makes room for itself inside the mind. Lists line up, lines find their level. Sleep will turn today into something a hand can trust tomorrow. He steps to the doorway and looks toward the river. Bats flit noiseless pinches of the dusk. Somewhere near the quay, a rope slides against wood with a throat-clearing sound and then rests. The tablet house closes its day with a final breath, a last lampwick lowered, a door beam set into its cradle, the quiet click that says the room has its own sleep to keep. The teacher's voice comes once more, softened by the lamp. Tomorrow, tallies of bricks, he says, almost to the room itself. And a list of reeds by length, The students understand that this is a blessing disguised as instruction. Bricks stack best in minds that have slept. If your eyelids are heavy now, let them fall. The shells will mind the tablets. The hearth will finish its small remembering. Night will lay its cool cloth on the roof. And as the river darkens and clay grows still, let's travel quietly across seas to wooden wards and narrow bridges where, in Edo's deep night, a watchman walks with paper lantern and wooden clappers, heaping time for streets that prefer to sleep. Night reaches Edo the way ink reaches paper, first a pale wash, then a deep, even tone. Roof lines soften, canals gather the sky, and shutters find their joins. In a lane of wooden houses built shoulder to shoulder, a watchman ties his sash and lifts his paper lantern from its peg. The lantern's frame is light bamboo, its skin of oiled paper faintly amber before the flame. On the cloth of his short coat a stitched crest shows the ward's mark, simple lines that neighbors know. He tests the wick with a quiet breath, then gives his wooden clappers a single, unhurried strike. The sound is clean and wooden, more like to pieces of dry bamboo greeting each other than anything that could disturb sleep. He waits for the echo to finish its small travel down the lane. Nothing answers except a temple bell far off, its tone rounding the hour. The watchman nods to the idea of time and begins his first round. A gentle aside, in Edo, time is counted by temple bells and by the watch itself. Curfew is less about forbidding and more about reminding wood and when to keep company without mischief. Lanterns make islands of sight on streets that already know their way. Sandals lace across his feet plaited straw that understands stone. A tenubwi cloth sits folded under his cap to keep sweat and dew from trading places on his brow. At his belt hangs a small pouch with oiled paper for the lantern and a spare wig. The clappers, Hyoshiji, rest in his hand, edges worn by many nights of simple sentences. I am here, take care with fire, sleep safely. He passes the neighborhood well. The rope is coiled, the bucket turned upside down so the night cannot climb in. He touches the wooden lid with the back of his fingers, not to measure temperature, only to make sure the hinge remembered to sit fully. Beside the well, a small shrine's roof bears a fresh leaf someone placed there at dusk. The watchman lifts his lantern slightly so the paper light can visit the tiny gate. He does not bowl, he lets the light do it. At the corner, a notice board stands under a modest roof, a place where edicts and ward announcements live. In daylight people read here, at night the watchman's lantern only checks the edges for curls and the footing for damp. A damp corner of paper teaches him that the morning will want a fresh paste of rice. He raises the clappers and gives to slow taps. Fire caution, he says softly into the lane, not as warning but as habit, the phrase that belongs to his rounds the way commas belong to a sentence. He turns toward the canal. The bridge here is narrow, its planks shiny where many feet have polished them. Between the planks, thin lines of water show a darker night than the one above. He sets his sandal down, then the next, careful and untroubled. The lantern's circle follows in. Across the water, a fisherman's boat bumps against a post and then remembers not to. The watchman pauses halfway to listen to the city's even breath. A late ladle put down, a gate bar lowered, the last cup set on a shelf. Nothing asked for more than that. A gentle aside, the night watch is not a hunt, it is a long conversation with wood, paper, rope, and ember. The clappers speak so sparks forget to pretend to be stars. On the far bank stands a fire lookout tower, a simple open frame with a bell. The tower keeper has already made his climb and is now a patient silhouette. The watchman lifts his lantern in greeting. No words pass, because wood and distance hold them better for morning. He writes a small mark in his pocket tablet, thin cedar slivers bound with string, to remember that the watchtower's ladder wants oil soon. His pencil is a stick of soot wrapped in paper. The letter forms are short and friendly, the kind that erase as quietly as they appear. He walks past a row of Nagaya longhouses where many families hold a roof in common, and a path in front becomes a shared hallway. Doors are closed, shoes sit in careful pairs. From somewhere in the middle comes a baby's breath sob that is more effort than distress. A low murmur answers it, a woman's voice shaped like a warm cloth. The watchman lifts the clappers once, then decides not to use them here. The lantern's small circle is language enough. At the end of the row, an ash bucket waits under its eaves. He looks into it. The ash is cold and settled. A clean stick tells the same story. He sets the lid back exactly where it found its balance. His feet learn again the lane slope toward the river, how the boards change note under them, how a gap after the third house needs the care of half a step. He has walked this curve so often that his stride is a memory unrolling. The wind shifts, polite as a sleeve brushed past a sleeve. It carries a hint of soy and smoke from a shop that cooled its vats late. The watchman lets the scents arrange themselves and continues. A cat moves along a wall at arm's length above his head, tail a small question mark that knows its answer. He lifts the lantern a finger's width so the paper doesn't test the cat's whiskers. A corner tea stall has set its benches inside and leaned the signboard against the post. He checks the brazier pit cinders still, no stubborn glow. With his staff tip, he stirs the ashes once, listening for any secret red that would rather not be watched. None shows. He smooths the surface with the staff's back, leaves it level as a pond, and continues. A gentle aside. Most prevention looks like nothing. A lid correctly set, a cord not frayed, an ember convinced to become ash. These are the small, repeated agreements that keep wood from remembering how much it liked the sun when it was a tree. The temple bell lifts its voice again, lower now, folding the quarter hours into each other the way a careful cook folds egg into batter. The watchman stops where his lane meets a larger street and gives the clappers 3 unhurried strikes. The sound travels further here, meeting other watch sounds from neighboring wards. It is never a chorus, only a lightly braided rope of wood on wood that says the city has corners that pay attention. He glances at the sky, though the lantern tells enough. A cloud the size of a sleeve crosses the moon and forgets to leave. No wind worry yet. The paper lantern does not fuss. He notes the softness for later rounds. In the second watch of night, mist likes bridges. In the third, shutters cool enough to shrink. He will put his palm to the places that talk when wood changes its mind, the bottom of a sliding door, the crossbar of a gate, and if anything asked, he will ease it, not fix it, just ease it. He reaches the river stairs where a water carrier sometimes leaves his yoke before dawn. The steps hold a damp that doesn't trouble boots, but would confuse straw sandals if someone hurried. No one is hurrying. He rests one clapper against the other without striking, as if letting the wood remember its sound without making it. On his way back toward the well, he passes the ward's storehouse. Its walls are thick clay, its door supported by crosspieces that ask to be lifted with both hands. He doesn't lift them. He only listens to the rope at the latch dot dry. He soon writes this too on his cedar slip, storehouse latch, dry all tomorrow. A note more for the ward than for himself, because notes make neighbors into a single, useful hand. He returns to the starting post and sets the lantern on its nail to trim the wick with a twig. The flame steadies, neither greedy nor shy. He drinks once from a small gourd water that learned coolness from the well and wipes the rim with his tenugui. The clappers rest against his thigh. He waits while the lane listens back to him. The quiet has a healthy sound, not empty at all. It is full of rested wood and roofs that have decided to keep their places. The second watch arrives the way dew arrives. First you think the air is ordinary, then your sleeve says otherwise. The watchman lifts his lantern and feels the paper cool under his palm. He gives the clappers to slow taps, spaced so the sound can fold itself and fade. From far lanes, other wooden answers return, light as a cart's rope touching its peg. Not a conversation, only a reassurance that corners still have names. He turns toward a street of shop-front houses where rain doors a motto sleep along the eaves like quiet planks. By day they slide down to make the foyer a plain wall. By night they often rest in place to keep wind and weather from rehearsing mischief. He pauses at each doorway and puts his fingers on the lower rail. The wood has taken a small drink from the damp. It sits fuller, friendlier, not swollen enough to trouble the groove. He lifts his lantern a hand's breadth so the light settles under the rail and checks for the small melody of gaps that means air can pass but sparks cannot. The melody is there. He nods to it as if to a neighbor whose name he never needs to say. A gentle aside, a motto are not bars. They are lids that turn a delicate shop of paper walls into a plain, patient box. The city learned long ago that plain boxes sleep better than beautiful screens when wind feels. Curious, at a dyer's shop, indigo breath still clings to the threshold from the day's work. A washstone lanes at the step, edges smooth with years of water and cloth. He crouches and palms the stone, not to judge the trade, only to see whether a brazier might have been left too near. It has not. A shallow ash pan sits under its eave like a round moon gone dim. He touches the ash with the back of a finger and finds only coolness. He brushes the rim once with the side of his hand to leave it tidy. Tidiness remembers itself in the morning. On the next corner, a woodblock printer's shop has set its blocks to dry upright in a rack, grain lines soft and dark in the lantern's amber. Someone inside wets a brush and lays paste on a backing paper. The scrape is unhurried, friendly to the hour. The watchman does not strike the clappers here. The sound of paper breathing on wood already fills the small room with enough company. He tips his head forward so the lantern light falls just inside and says, "Fire caution," softly. A reply comes like a nod in words. "Seen," says the printer, and sets his brush in a dish so its bristles will not lean, a sign that the night will be kind. He moves on, sandals sure on the plank walk that bridges a drainage runnel. The runnel carries a thread of water that knows its map. Its voice is a whisper with no news. A bamboo fence nearby creaks a little as the damp applies its small lesson. He puts his palm to one post and leans a finger's weight. The creak settles into a hush. Wood likes to be reminded of how quiet sounds. At a Nagaya door, he hears a loon. The rhythm is slow, a weaver letting the last inches of weft find their place. The lantern makes a polite circle on the paper panel. The loom's treadle stops. Within a voice calls, "Last row." He answers with a single, soft strike of the clappers. The message is not stop. It is close the ember. He smells chestnut paste and rice. Someone has closed the lids well. He leaves the lane easier than he found it. A gentle aside. The watch is not an order given to people. It is a habit shared with things: doors, rails, hemp cords, and the little seas of ash and shallow pans. If the habit becomes steady, the night learns the same steady step. Mist gathers along the canal as predictably as a book gathers dust if left open. It rises from the black water in a polite curl and wanders across the bridge boards. The watchman tests the first plank with his sandal, and then the second. Their surfaces are more thoughtful now, but not slick. He lifts the lantern slightly above waist height to keep the paper from tasting the mist. On the far bank, the bell tower is a brushed ink line against an unmade sky. He stands beneath the tower where four posts meet the earth with iron shoes, small plates hammered years ago to keep legs from sipping damp until they forgot to be legs. The ladder looks honest, rungs tied where the wood prefers to be tied. Above, the bell-keeper moves once, and then stands still again, a figure with more air than body. The watchman rests his clappers on his palm and listens for the bell. When it comes, the tone is round, not bright. It moves through the mist without trying to hurry. He feels it in his collarbone more than in his ear. He notes on a cedar slip bell true ladder sound or the rung lashings before rain day and tucks the small thud back into its place. Or on the corner, a storehouse for the ward, thick earthen walls, little window, big door sits with its weight in the ground. He checks the crossbeam and the bar's leather binding dock dry. He touches the clay with the back of his hand, cool like a shaded pot. A woven mat, rolled and tied, hangs under the eaves ready to become a windbreak. He tightens one knot a quarter turn, not fixing, only reminding. He writes a chipped note, when mat edge loosened, secured. From a side lane comes the soft rattle of night soil buckets on a yoke. The carrier's step is a practiced metronome. The watchman waits at a widening in the lane so the yoke can pass without the lantern's frame fussing against the slosh. They share a nod that contains a city's worth of small understandings: when to step, where to place the next footfall, how to keep the night from noticing, to men who prefer to leave it undisturbed. He checks a row of fire buckets soak on hooks outside a magistrate's courthouse. Each is turned mouth down so rain cannot rehearse inside it. He lifts one, flips it, and finds the bottom sound. Wood answers his knuckle with a sincere note. He leaves it inverted again because fullness at night is not as useful as readiness. He runs a finger under the hook to make sure the iron has not begun to argue with damp. It has not. A gentle aside. City safety often lives in small decisions made before sleep: a bucket turned the right way, a door bar that learned not to rattle, an ember put to bed under its ash. These choices are light enough to make wearing sandals. At the ward's little shrine to a fire deity, a votive rope hangs newly replaced. The paper streamers are still crisp, their folds cut recently with clean shears. He lifts the lantern so the paper shines without heat. He does not pray in words. He lets the lantern circle do the bowing. The clappers stay quiet. Silence is a good offering when wood is listening. The mist thickens a shade, then thins. He follows its retreat and comes to a tea cellar stall where rain shutters are half lowered, not as defense, only as a sign that steam has ended its shifts for the day. He sets his hand to the runner and eases it to finger width slower so the plank sits square in its groove. The stall's owner, just inside, sees the motion and says obliged, in a tone that has the weight of a cup. He answers sleep easy, in a tone that weighs the same. Back at the bridge, water accepts a floating leaf and keeps it as if it were a small letter. The watchman watches it reach the pier and change its mind, then pass on. He strikes the clappers once. The sound meets the tower's breath just as the bell begins to feel like starting another hour. He turns toward the ward's back street where wood shops keep their shavings in sacks for the morning brazier. He kneels at one sack's mouth and presses the shavings down with a flat hand, feeling for heat. They answer with a cool rustle. He ties the cord with a square knot to moves that want to be to moves, not one, and leaves the knot tails lying with their ends turned inward. Lying outward, they would find an ember faster. Small habits have favorite outcomes. He returns to the well. A late neighbor lifts the bucket for a last rinse bowl. They share the rope, one hand each, lowering and raising with equal weight so the pulley does not scold. The watchman steadies the bucket while the neighbor fills his water dipper, then listens as the lid's hinge accepts the gently lowered cover. He writes nothing. Not every good thing needs paper. The third watch begins when roofs sigh. Heat that lived in beans and shutters all day loosens its hand and steps off. The lantern's glow feels a touch warmer to the skin because the air has finished its evening work of gathering damp and now rests. The watchman listens once to the lane, no hurried feet, only the soft arithmetic of water where the runnel measures itself without numbers. He gives the clappers one slow strike, then another after the sound returns and fades. The rhythm is not a call, it is a bookmark placed gently between pages of the night. He turns along a narrower back street where the houses' backs face a shared yard. Here shutters settle, as wood cools, the rails murmur little, then remember quiet. He lays his palm to a door crosspiece and feels the grain's small contraction, a safe movement, like a sleeve being set down on a folded cloth. A gentle aside, wood speaks most at the edge between warm and cool. Night watch listens more with the skin than with the ear, palm to rail, forearm to post. The back of fingers to a door that used to hold the day's sun. He stoops beside a brazier just inside a half-open sliding door. Ash rounds itself over the coal's last breath, the small gray hill holding the shape of earlier flame. He parts it with the end of his staff, not to disturb, only to confirm that the glow beneath has accepted its rest. A single stubborn coal keeps a cherry at its core. He nudges a spoon of ash over it, like tucking a child's foot back under a blanket. The glow agrees and softens into memory. He sets the ashes surface smooth again with a flat, quiet stroke. At a joiner's shed, shavings in a sack wait for morning fires. He tests the sack's tie to even tails, not set square, no loose tongue to go looking for company. In the corner, a pot of water meant for accidents sits with a lid. He lifts the lid and lets a lantern circle touch the surface. Still, clean, ready. He leaves it exactly as he found it. Readiness is a kind of calm that prefers not to be improved upon. He passes the ward bucket, hooks again, mouths inverted, rims dry. A cat that patrols their line pauses to study his lantern, and then places a paw carefully between two shadow stripes. Cats have their own watch that says less about fire and more about fish bones. He nods as if the hallway of buckets had just introduced him to a colleague. Near the canal, shutters make a more audible mindfulness small tack-tack sounds as cooling rails set into their grooves. The watchman lays the flat of his hand against one frame and presses just a weight or two, easing wood into agreement with the night. He writes a cedar note, corner shutter, soft lane, sit on low runner, wipe tomorrow. Notes are as much for sunlight as for memory. Morning likes to be told where to put its first cloth. A gentle aside. Prevention happens when hands meet things just before things decide to behave like themselves. A cola cherry. A shutter deciding whether to sit square or not. These are the small forks in a road the watch travels many times. Past the bridge, the fish market wakes early in a low voice. The watchman steps onto boards that remember many wet mornings. He keeps his lantern high enough that paper stays clear of the mist the river sends on its first errands. Two sellers arrive in silence, yokes across their shoulders, buckets swinging without spilling their pace, a compromise between eagerness and respect for water's wish to leave the bucket. They set wood planks over low stands and lower the buckets into patient hollows. The first lid lifts. The smell is clean and salt-sweet, not pushy, a kind of truth about distance traveled quickly. The watchman nods and gives a single clapper tap from farther than arm's length. The sound is not warning, only the night's acknowledgment to the morning's first customers. One seller nods back and reaches for a rag to catch a bead of water that would prefer to run to the edge of the plank. The rag knows how to answer. It moves water from the plank to itself and then out into air. He walks the market edge where the torch baskets iron, not bamboo, stand empty. He touches one with the back of his knuckle. Iron holds it chill in a way wood does not. He confirms they will not be lit until dawn properly shakes its sleeve. He writes a small note. No torches before bell at first light. Not a rule everyone knows, but a kindness to future him, in case a morning forgets its best habit. On his way back to the ward, he passes a bathhouse. Steam is over. The chimney exhales a last, damp syllable like a yawn. The stoker, a bare-armed figure in a cotton wrap, rakes the fire bed into a low, even field. The watchman pauses. The stoker turns the rake's teeth flat and buries the last small embers under a spread of ash. The two men watch the surface for a count of 10. No red returns. The stoker sets the rake against the wall, teeth up, not down, so feet will not meet them blindly in the den. The watchman lifts the clappers and lets them make a single bow of sound, then lowers them again. A gentle aside, the bow can be made by wood to wood, not only by back to bill. Sound is a politeness when it doesn't insist on being noticed. He turns through the lane of Nagaya again. A baby, earlier a breath sob, is now a little river of sleep. A father's cough shows its edges and then smooths out. Someone shifts a tub against a wall with care to set it down gently. That small sound is the difference between a house sleeping and a house enduring sleep. The watchman adjusts his stride to the quieter boards where a plank was replaced last spring. Those places appreciate feet that choose the center, away from nailheads. At the shrine corner, votive streamers stir in a breeze that has remembered it once knew mountains. He lowers the lantern so the paper shines upward. Light draws soft edges on the underside of the eaves, like a brush that chooses the lighter stroke. He does not speak. The clappers do not ask to be struck. This part of the watch is listening arranged into walking. He checks the ward's storehouse again. Clay walls give back the night slowly through his palm. The bar's leather binding rests without interest in changing. A frog, perhaps lost from the canal, takes a slow hop across the threshold stone and chooses the cool crack where the wall meets the ground. He waits for it to be somewhere else before his foot asks to share the stone. At a sake shop, the last cask is capped. He lays his hand flat on the lid's rope knot. It is snug no tail to seek a lamp flame no lamplit. A faint perfume of rice lingers like a memory spoken without vain detail. He writes nothing here. The cask and the knot have already presented their report. He returns toward the well in case a neighbor comes for coolness. No one does, but the bucket's rim has beaded along one side, where the air practiced being water again. He tips the bucket's mouth to rest at an angle that admits air but discourages a curious moth. The pulley clicks once when the rope settles. The click is a friendly sound that comes from wood deciding to sit still. Before there are turns, he stands under the bell tower again. The bell-keeper moves as if remembering he owns a shadow. The watchman watches the mist thin into a gauze that the bell will carry through more easily. When the hour arrives, the tone is broader than earlier rounder, as if it has learned the night's note and is now ready to hand it to dawn. The watchman answers with a single clapper strike, then writes, "Bell round, air clear, fish sellers set no torches yet." A gentle aside, records at night are not just for officials. They are for morning hands that wake a city. A cedar slip says white runner, and a shop boy will bring a cloth. A note says oil letter lashings, and the tower will climb more safely for a month. He takes his lantern to a narrow bridge where do sometimes uses planks to rehearse slipperiness. He tests the first boards with the edges of his sandals, finds their courtesy, and passes. The river is a black brush laid across the street's likeness. It writes nothing, but it keeps a place for everything that will be written after daybreak: lists of fish, prices for bundles of greens, a tally of charcoal bags carried into kitchens. When he returns to the starting post, he trims the wick with the twig he keeps for trimming. The flame brightens a whisper and then returns to steady. He drinks once more from the gourd. The water is cool in a way that belongs to wells, not to night. He dries the rim with the tenugui and folds the cloth corner to corner until it is a neat square that pleases the pocket. The last hours before dawn begin as a thinning of dark, not a brightness. Edges return slowly, roof line, shutter rail, the bridge's handrail like ink drying into legibility. The watchman lifts his lantern and finds its circle a little wider by courtesy of the coming light. He gives the clappers to low, unhurried taps. They sound rounder now, wood answering wood in a room that has opened one more shutter. At the lane's mouth, to charcoal men arrive in soft-soled clogs, their steps making a hush rather than a knock. Each balances a pole across the shoulders with bags slung from both ends, straw-wrapped charcoal that smells faintly of yesterday's pine and last winter's wind. Their pace is practiced, a small rise on the toes when the pole asks, a small fall when the street suggests where the next foot belongs. The watchman stands to the side where the lane widens by a hand's width, lantern lifted a little higher so the paper does not brush the sacks. He offers one clapper tap as greeting. The men nod without speech and guide the load past a shuttered shop, taking care not to let straw whisper against paper screens that prefer to sleep until coin speaks. A gentle aside, much of a city's safety rides on the way heavy things move near light things. soft soles, balanced poles, a shoulder that knows how to turn without arguing. These are fire's quiet rivals. They set two bags by a bathhouse door and one by a cookshop, each on a wooden board so the street's damp won't climb. The watchman tests a board's steadiness with the edge of his footing and writes on a cedar slip, "Boards true, one knot tail long, trim at light." He moves on, the scent of clean carbon trailing in, simple as a black line across paper. In a narrower alley, a papermaker's courtyard waits like a page with the first word thought but not yet written. The vet is covered with a reed mat. The bamboo screen that helps fiber settle leans against a post, dripping the last few patient drops from the night's final sheet. A tub sits with settled pulp water above it, clear as if it learned transparency in a temple. The watchman lifts the mat's corner just enough to let air greet surface, then sets it back so Dong will find the vat calm. He touches the bamboo screen with the back of his fingers, cool, not cold, friendly to the next hour's hands. He raises the lantern so the circle visits the drying racks. Sheets made before midnight hang like pale flags that decided to say nothing. Their edges curl a breath from the weight of damp, and the memory of the maker's lift hand lay. He steps close enough to feel even a snow sheet lifted to fast, none left to lawn. Satisfied, he lowers the lantern and lets stillness continue its work. A gentle aside, paper becomes itself in the night's slow company, water leaving without drama, fiber remembering to hold hands. Morning only finishes what patience began. He turns toward the ward square where the notice board stands under its little roof. A boy from the headman's house appears with a bowl of warm rice paste held in two hands, steam making a small ghost before his face. Behind him, his older sister carries a brush and a stack of fresh sheets with neat black characters, the day's polite requests, a road sweep after rain, a reminder that brazier should be cool before it travels, a note about the festival date moving one day for a dignitary's visit. The watchman nods. The boy nods back and sets the bowl on the board's shelf. The sister wets the board with a cloth, smoothing yesterday's shreds into agreement with the wood. The watchman holds the lantern as if it were sunrise he could place where needed. She lays the paste in calm strokes and presses the first sheet so the corners kiss flat. He watches for a curl and sees none. For a torn corner he would offer a pin of bamboo. The morning needs edges that do not snag the eyes. He writes a small slip, board pasted, to spare pins left in shelf groove. The boy returns with a second bowl, and the three of them share the space without hurry. Paper remembers fingers, fingers remember paper. The temple bell counts the hour with a tone that has begun to taste light. The watchman answers with one clapper strike, and then lowers the sticks. He turns down the lane where shutters sit lifted to finger widths, breathing. A shopkeeper's cough comes, not a lonely room learning to be a place where customers will soon say good morning. He pauses at a brazier just inside and lays a spoon of ash over a coal that tries to recall yesterday too brightly. The coal forgets. The room thanks him by smelling like tea leaves and not like regret. At the river stairs, the fishmonger he saw earlier now works with a younger helper, fingers quick but not careless. Buckets exchange small, silver truths with the air. He stays far enough that his lantern does not volunteer warmth where cold is friend, close enough to see that no torch has been lit early. A boatman ties a half-hitch and then adds another crossing, making the knot into a thought that won't come undone if someone glances at it too hard. The watchman writes nothing. good knots carry their own paper inside them. Back along the bridge, dew lifts from planks. The lantern almost doesn't matter now, though its amber agrees with the day as a candle agrees with a birthday dawn. He trims the wick one last neatness and closes the little door on the paper with two fingers that have learned never to hurry near flame that hears. He passes the ward's storehouse yet again. Clay returns the night in a long, cool exhale. The bar's leather shows no new wish to loosen. He paces the building once more, a slow square that leaves footprints arranged like a frame. On the lee side, a stray leaf has lodged where he meets wall. He brushes it down and out into the lane. Leaves and corners like to pretend to be tender if left to their own stories. A gentle aside. Dawn's safety is mostly yesterday's safety remembered and slightly adjusted. The work repeats. Repetition is comfort rather than boredom when it keeps neighbors unharmed. He stops at the well. A woman with a bucket and a wrapped headcloth waits, not because she cannot lift alone, but because the watchman's hands are part of mornings. They lower and raise together without counting, rope moving with a sound like a soft brush on wood. She thanks him with a look that includes her household, and the water and the day. He answers with a nod that includes the same. The boy from the headman's house runs past carrying the empty paste bowl, shoes slapping once on a board, and then learning to lift less. The watchman notes in his slips, paste done, board smooth. He slides the slivers back into their corded packet, soot pencil tucked under the same string, and pats the bundle as if it were a small creature that had completed a trick. The bell tower's keeper comes down the ladder with the careful feet of someone going from cloud to ground. His hands smell faintly of oil from the rum lashings. He and the watchman trade a look that says the night did not try anything clever. The keeper sets the bell rope to rest. The rope accepts weariness like a sash unwound. Light takes a breath and lengthens into lanes. Paper doors become pale instead of dark. The lantern's flame seems to understand it is no longer necessary as a leader and is content to be a companion for a few more streets. The watchman gives the clappers to small taps the last before dawn takes the sound-making for itself and returns to the starting post to hang the lantern by its nail while he checks the wick one more time for neatness. He sips from the gourd. Water has found a morning chill that the well lends like a neighbor. Dawn gathers itself without hurry. Color returns as if a painter had dipped the softest brush into warm water and touched the sky in long, patient strokes. The watchman feels the moment when his lantern's circle is no longer a leader, only a companion. He lifts the clappers and gives to gentle taps with greeting wood, then sets off for the closing round. He begins where he often begins and ends, at the line of bucket hooks outside the ward office. The buckets rest mouth down, rims dry, handles turned inward so sleeves won't catch. He lifts one, lets it speak its hollow, honest note, and sets it back exactly square on its hoop. A stray thread of hemp on a handle asks to be trimmed. He rolls it between thumb and forefinger until it forgets to fray. He writes a last cedar slip, hook sound, one handle thread cut at light. The slip joins its neighbor's under cord, a quiet braid of the night's small thoughts that morning hands will read like a to-do whispered in the right ear. A gentle aside. An ending round is not a search, it is a thanking. Buckets, bars, rails, and ropes have kept their side of the agreement. The watch returns the favor with a glance, a touch, and a neat note. He crosses to the storehouse. Clay holds coolness with the fidelity of a jar. The bar's leather binding keeps its promise. He walks the building once, a slow square, heels quiet on beaten earth. On the lee side, yesterday's leaf would have liked to linger. He has already brushed it away, but he checks the corner again because corners prefer to be visited more than once. They are flattered by attention and behave better for it. At the well, dew beads the lid like a short string of glass. The rope lies in a tidy loop. The bucket mouth rests at a small angle to welcome air. He changes nothing. Readiness that has remembered itself needs no help. He listens to the pulley's pleasant silence and lets it become part of his breath. He turns toward the bridge. Mist thins into threads and then into nothing, as if the river were gently unspooling a shawl. Boards that held damp earlier now feel level and composed under straw sandals. He keeps the lantern high to please habit, though daylight already draws its own circles. At the far end he pauses under the fire tower. The keeper has come down. Ladder lashings show a modest shine from oil. Bell true, the watchman says, which is more compliment than report. Air kind, answers the keeper, a remark that could be about weather or people. Either way it fits. He follows the canal edge to the fishmonger's stand. Water in the tubs is freshened. No torch has misbehaved. A boy sweeps a plank's wet shine into the runnel with strokes that do not splash. The watchman taps once on the clappers from a respectful distance, the sort of Bowood knows how to make. He writes no slip. Not everything needs paper. Some things prefer having been seen. A tea stall opens its rain door the width of a hand. Inside, a kettle's early breath is thin and agreeable. The watchman sets his palm to the brazier's rim warm, not busy, and watches the small coal obey the ash. He lowers the rain door a finger more so it sits plumb in the groove. You put the world straight, the stall keeper murmurs from the steam. I just ask it politely, he replies, and the exchange rests between them like a cup set down without sound. Back along the longhouse row, a mother steps out to shake a cloth once, then fold it. She nods, and the nod includes last night's baby, who has become a long, slow sigh asleep. Someone slides a door 3 finger widths. The runner answers with a single, neat tack. The watchman places his forearm lightly against the post until the wood forgets the urge to answer twice. He notes, runner dust at Southrow wipe. Small cloths will find it after rice is rinsed. He returns to the ward office, as the sky decides to be morning. Inside, the headman's desk waits with the same patience as his clay jar of ink. A low stool stands ready. The watchman ties his lantern to its nail beside the doorway, flame steady, door closed, then steps in and bows as much to the room as to the person in it. The headman sits, sleeves folded back, brush laid across the rest so the hairs won't learn a bend. He has a face that has learned to listen to small reports as if they were poems. The bundle of cedar slips comes free under the watchman's thumb. He lays them out, reads each in the same quiet voice he used on the lane. Board true, not tail long trim at light. Bell true, latchings oiled. Paste done, 2 pins left in groove. Corner shutter wipe runner, Southrow dust. He places, last of all, a short slip with a single line. Nothing asked for a bucket in haste. That is the city's best news. A gentle aside, a report is a kind of lullaby for daylight. It tells the morning what the night has held, not to boast, not to alarm, only to let the day begin without guessing. The headman nods and makes 3 small notes of his own, 1 word per line, a promise to have a boy trim the rope thread, to send oil to the ladder tomorrow, to bring a cloth down the south row. He lifts a seal and presses it gently into a dab of soft clay the watchman offers on a chip. The impression is neat and unshowy. The watchman returns the slips to their cord, tucks them into the wooden box that lives under the desk's corner, and sets the clay chip beside it where hands will see it and do the seeing quickly. He steps back outside. Daylight now owns the lane. Paper doors have become pale bread. The bridge has turned from ink line to wood. Birds try a few syllables, and then agree not to insist. The watchman stands at the peg by the office door and tends to the last ritual. He opens the lantern's little door and trims the wick to a tidy square, no fray, no brag. He cups the flame with one hand, leans in, and, with 2 dampened fingertips, pinches it out. The glow sighs and becomes a memory. A curl of smoke writes a single, elegant character in the air, and then decides not to be read. He hands the lantern to cool, wipes the clappers with the fold of his tenugui habit, teaches wood to last, and sets them on their shelf with the edges aligned. The street has started its own watch. Shopkeepers lift rain doors. Buckets turn mouth up to be filled. The bell tower keeper walks home with the easy feet of someone who has carried time and put it down. Gently, the watchman unties his sash and smooths it flat, then rolls it with the kind of neatness he likes to give to rope and ash. He nods once down the lane, not to anyone, but to the idea of a ward that has kept itself and will keep itself again tonight. His breath matches the city's breath, no longer the whisper of mist, not yet the talk of markets, just the comfortable middle between. A gentle aside, sleep keeps people, attention keeps wood, notes keep mornings. Together they make a city that prefers safety so thoroughly it forgets to name it. And as Edo's lantern cools on its nail, Lutz steps softly into a walled plot where dew settles on leaves and a small kettle warms by lamplight, a quiet herb garden where simple remedies are made with patience, 1 sprig, 1 spoon, 1 careful breath at a time. Dawn lays a thin veil of silver across the garden wall. Inside the little plot, pots of beaten earth divide beds of thyme, sage, and rue into tidy rectangles, each edged with low wicker borders that keep leaves from arguing with the walkway. A door opens without hurry, and a woman steps out with a basket on her arm. Her gown is plain wool. Her sleeves are pinned back with wooden pegs so cuffs will not ask to taste sap. A linen veil keeps loose hair from traveling where wind suggests. She pauses to let the garden notice her, and then begins the day's small harvest. The basket is light willow, lined with a square of cloth. Its emptiness is part of its usefulness. Herbs prefer space to breathe. In her other hand she carries a short knife with a rounded tip, the kind that invites cutting close without nicking a stem that plans to grow again. She kneels at the thyme bed and listens with her fingertips. Dew beads along the tiny leaves. The scent rises in a quiet spiral, neither strong nor shy, as if the plant were reciting a line it has known for years. A gentle aside, many gardens keep time by the bell or the sun. A physic garden, a simple place where kitchen herbs become medicine, keeps time by the way dew leaves leaf. Morning is a good hour. Leaves bear oils honestly, stems let go without argument. She clips the tops above a node and lays sprigs on the cloth in loose rows. The basket stays shallow, weight bruises taste. From thyme she moves to sage broad leaves with soft nap that holds dew like a careful hand. She gathers a few leaves only from each plant, the way a polite guest takes a small portion from each platter and leaves the table looking unchanged. Rosemary stands upright nearby, its needles fragrant even before touch. She does not ask much of it today, a twig or two will season oil later. Plantain and yarrow grow beside the path where feet once taught them the edge of the bed. They will offer themselves for a sov mint for scrapes. Birds practice short syllables in the hedge. The woman's steps answer with soft earth sounds. At the bed of feverfew, daisied heads turn like small, tidy suns. She takes enough for a tisn that will sit under cup and share its bitterness in a useful way. Mint waits at the far corner within a buried jar ring that keeps roots from walking into the rest of things. She thanks Mint quietly and trims it as if trimming a thought that can easily grow more fast. Beside the garden door a wooden bench holds the day's tools. A mortar sits on it, stone smooth by years of pestle circles. The pestle's handle bears the darkened shine only clean hands can make. A small hand bellows leans under the bench for the fire later. Its leather smells like last winter's careful oil. Earthenware jars simple, shoulder-bellied, cool to the touch wait on a shelf just inside, their mouths stopped with cork and cloth. Each jar wears a paper label tied with hemp string, oil of rosemary, vinegar with thyme, honey steeped with sage, beeswax cakes. The handwriting is sturdy and calm, letters evenly spaced as if they were plants arranged in beds. A gentle aside, there is a difference between magic and method, though both like quiet. Here the work is method, heat low, strain slow. Label plain so that the hand that reaches for a jar at midnight knows exactly what it finds. She carries the basket to the small room off the kitchen, where a brazier glows under a blackened kettle. The kettle's water is not boiling. It has chosen the small voice it uses when it intends to hold steady for a while. She lays sprigs of thyme and a piece of sage on a clean board. With the rounded knife she crushes each leaf once, not enough to tear, just enough to remind the oils to come forward. A clay cup waits with a lid that is simply another cup turned upside down. She spoons herbs into the cup, pours the hot water, and sets the lid. Steam writes a short message and then disappears. On a scrap of parchment, she notes the time by the sun on the sill. Steeping wants minutes, not moments. There is also oil to prepare. She sets a shallow pan on a ring above coals where heat travels upward in a good temper. Into the pan she pours clear oil pressed last autumn, then adds a rosemary twig and two sage leaves. The oil does not argue, it listens. She keeps the back of her hand over the pan to measure warmth by comfort. Hot would be too much. Warm is a conversation. When scent reaches her, she slips the pan to the bench where the heat becomes gentler while it thinks. Shelves hold simple cloths folded like letters waiting for answers. She chooses one and lines a small sieve. The mortar receives plantain and yarrow. The pestle circles without haste, whisper on stone, green becoming darker under pressure. She adds a spoon of honey warmed by the hearth's edge, and a thumb of beeswax shaved from a cake with the dull back of the knife. The mixture yields and thickens. It will become a salve for knees that test the world and elbows that misjudge doorways. A gentle aside, words like simple and soft share a root with save. In old kitchens, saving often meant helping nature do what it usually does: close a skin, loosen a cough. coax heat to leave a brow. The work is not dramatic. It is housework with leaves. On a side stool sits a small wooden board with a shallow groove and a handful of pegs. This is her portion measure. She presses the green salve into the groove with the back of a spoon and draws the pegs lightly across. The pegs leave even ridges, which tell her later how much to take for a thumb's worth. She will fill tiny pots when the mixture is ready, each corked and labeled in the same plain hand. She returns to the tea. The lid comes off, the scent is low, and herb sure. She strains it through cloth into a cup whose lip is not chipped and sets the dregs aside. Chickens like such kindness. On another scrap she writes, "Fine sage 'tisn't, morning," and a small mark that means loosen for cough. Later, when a neighbor sends a child with a question, the cup can travel with a clear answer. In the doorway the garden's light has turned less silver and more pale gold. Shadows have edges. She steps out to hang two cloths on a line where didactic sun will later instruct them in dryness. A bee visits rosemary and considers continuing on. The woman's hand finds the plant's stem and gives it the smallest friendly shake. The bee accepts the hint and chooses another sprig. She moves a small jar of vinegar to the sill and drops in a fresh ribbon of lemon peel and a finger's length of thyme twig. Vinegar keeps stories of bright things. Thyme tells it which stories to keep. This will be for wiping a forehead when summer heat persists past politeness, or for a cloth on the wrist when someone's pulse argues with itself. A gentle aside. Much of this is memory arranged into jars. Mothers handed measures to daughters, neighbors traded sprigs across low walls, traveling peddlers sold wax and bottles. And somewhere a monk wrote a page that found its way into a kitchen. Nothing here insists on being rare. She tidies the bench by brushing herbs back into the basket with the side of her hand, not sweeping, only guiding. Leaves that cannot be used today will dry on a clean tray in a breeze that enjoys its own company. She sets the pestle across the mortar like a bridge and covers both with a cloth. Flies will not be interested if doors learn to be fabric at the right moments. By mid-morning the garden wears a softer light. Dew has stepped back from leaf edges and left them tidy. The woman carries her basket toward the house loft. A narrow ladder leads up to a space where beams hold rows of cords stretched between pegs. Here there is mild and well-traveled. The small window near the eaves lets a steady draft pass through without pushing. She tests the breeze with the back of her hand, then begins to tie her bundles. Each bunch is small to finger's thickness at most, so stems will dry without sulking in the middle. She lays thyme sprigs side by side, stems aligned like brush bristles, and wraps them twice with twine. A loop goes over the cord so air can visit each leaf evenly. Sage is tied looser. Its broadleaves prefer a little space between neighbors. Mint, friendly but energetic, receives a paper tag with the day's mark so flavor and time can keep company on the same string. The rosemary twigs she spaces with a thumb's breadth between them. Needles dislike quarrels. A gentle aside. Drying is a polite conversation between leaf and air, to fast, and scent grows thin to slow, and leaf remembers earth more than sky. Bunches that can sway a little make better listeners. On a low shelf she sets a tray lined with netting for petals calendula from last month. A few chamomile heads from a late bed so their small voices do not blow away when the window decides to introduce itself. She checks the rack for dust and takes a cloth to the bean's top where spider threads like to write their own stories. She does not evict spiders from the corners entirely. They are tidy neighbors, and the loft respects workers who catch small wonders. Downstairs, the brazier has kept a patient glow. She prepares a small pot for warming beeswax, no flames licking the metal, only heat that thinks. A second pot holds water. The wax pot will sit within it so warmth surrounds rather than scolds. She shaves beeswax from a cake in slow curls that look like thin butter and slides them into the dry pot. The smell is clean and sweet, a memory of last summer's clover held without fuss. While the water considers its low simmer, she sets out small jars earthen, washed, and put to dry last evening. Each jar receives a clean cloth for a lid and a cork nearby, ready but not wedged. She warms the jars at the hearth's edge so Sav will not learn a cold shock as it enters. On a scrap of parchment, she writes labels in the same even hand: plantain yarrow salve, rosemary sage oil, mint vinegar. The letters like to sit upright, slanting invites misunderstanding at midnight. The water in the outer pot sends up just enough breath to fog the lower edges of metal. The wax curls surrender to liquid, turning clear and golden. She adds the green paste from the mortar plantain, and jarrow with a thumb of honey stirring with a stick trimmed smooth. The mixture finds its agreement and thickens into a glossy quiet. She tests a drop on the inside of her wrist, warm, not forward. With a small ladle she pours the salve into the waiting jars, leaving headroom for lids. No rush. A drip here, a white there, jars in a neat row cooling toward usefulness. A gentle aside, kitchen medicine asks for warmth, not heat, patience, not pride. A remedy that behaves in the pot will behave on a knee. Labels keep their promises when hands were calm at the beginning. A rap on the outer door announces a small visitor. A neighbor's girl steps in, shoes clean of clods, braid tight, eyes steady. In her hands a folded cloth and a wooden cup. For Aunt, she says, the cough in the morning rose again. The woman nods and sets about the simple service. From the cup left earlier she pours the thyme sage tisane into the wooden vessel. She fans it twice so steam loses its hurry. She dips the neighbor's cloth in vinegar with thyme, wrings it to thoughtful damp, and then rolls it into a cool band for a brow. She draws a line in the plain book that lies always near the hearth. Third day cough, morning, tisane, thyme sage, vinegar cloth for forehead, slow sips, rest. The goer receives the cup and cloth with two hands. Tell her today is for quiet, the woman says. No laundry until the third cough is smaller than the first. The girl nods, a message now folded neatly inside her. The plain book's pages carry months of such lines, short, steady entries that remember needs without drama. The dates are kept in the margin, the weather noted with a word: damp, east wind, close heat, crisp. Remedies are listed with their small measures, and any remarks about the response: sleep easier by noon, bruise changed to yellow, fever agreed to cloth and shade. There are also lines that say refuse to change and asked for the physician next morning. The book does not claim credit. It gathers memory so the next decision can be smaller. A peddler's bell passes the lane. The woman stands at the door and trades with the carrier a comb of dark honey for 2 handfuls of thyme and a little jar of mint vinegar. Honey helps in winter when throats forget politeness. She sets the comb on a plate where no ants will learn the route and writes in the book, honey in, thyme out to neighbor, a fairness recorded not for account, but for gratitude. She returns to the loft to check the hang of the morning's bunches. Shadows have moved an inch. Air has kept its promise. A single mint leaf has fallen and rests on a beam like a small boat in shallow water. She picks it up and, rather than return it to the string, places it on a tray for immediate use. Fallen leaves like to be first, not last. Down again, she strains the rosemary sage oil through a clean cloth into a bottle that has known this task before. The oil shows its new color in the light, less clear, more thoughtful. She will use it to rub along a stiff wrist later, or to scent a warm cloth laid across a chest that asks to breathe more easily. The ladle receives a rinse of hot water and a wipe. Tools like to rest without reminders of their last work. A gentle aside, most usefulness in a small house comes from returning things to the place where future hands will expect them. Shelves remember when helped minds rest when shelves remember. She wipes the rim of each jar and ties on cloth lids with string, the bow's loops tucked to the sides so nothing dangles to flirt with fire. Labels go on smooth under the fingers. She arranges the jars in a low cupboard with the contents facing out, salves on the left, oils in the middle, vinegars on the right, honey and wax above where mice do not visit. On the inside of the cupboard door, a small chart lists shelf neighbors. As seasons shift, jars trade places, but the chart stays frank and helps the hand that forgets. A gray cat enters, tail a deliberate question mark, and smells the air without comment. It chooses a warm square of floor near the brazier and kneads it once, twice, then folds into itself. The woman steps around the cat's chosen point as if it were a placed stool. Creatures are furniture when they are certain. The kettle has slackened to a sigh. She lifts it slightly, lets the coals breathe, then sets it down again. From a cloth bag she takes seeds saved from last year's beds, dill, coriander, a few poppy seeds for a neighbor's bread, and sets them in the dry of the windowsill. A reminder to trade later for a measure of salt. She writes in the book, poppy to baker when oven is quiet. Outside, the sun moves past the garden wall's first hinge of shadow. She walks the beds with a shallow bowl and her rounded knife to collect plantain leaves that volunteered near the path. They prefer company to bin. A few snails have written their slow letters on nasturtium. She moves them gently to the far hedge where they can write to the ditch instead. Back at the bench, she checks the sauve jars. The surface has set with a modest shine. She presses a small mark with the back of the spoon, a shallow crescent, so the eye can see later that someone cared. For evenness, she adds in the book a line for each jar. 5 pot sauve, 1 to neighbor. For kept, the simplicity pleases the page. Midday leans toward the house. She covers the brazier with a screen, keeps the kettle warm on stones, and opens the outer door a hand's breadth to invite a slow cool into the room. The garden's bees make their round music, the loft strings hold their quiet, and the cupboard breathes a very faint rosemary. Afternoon settles like a folded shawl over the yard. The house holds a calm, work-shaped silence. Even the kettle seems to breathe rather than speak. The woman tidies the bench and sets out 3 small bowls, earthen, plain, glazed only on the inside so they clean without complaint. Today asks for compresses, a gentle syrup, and a little walk with a basket. She begins with cool cloths for sore temples. From the cupboard she brings the jar of mint vinegar she refreshed in the morning. The liquid has already borrowed green brightness from the sprig and the curl of lemon peel. She dilutes a spoonful in a bowl of clean water until the scent lifts but does not leap. Two linen squares then, well washed, soft as repeated kindness, she folds twice, and lets them rest in the bowl until cloth and water learn one another's weight. She lifts each square, wrings it with a steady twist until no drip thinks of falling, then lays them on a small board. With a finger she smooths the edges so nothing tickles skin that wants comfort. A gentle aside. A compress is a way of placing attention where a has set up a small camp. Cloth, coolness, and a patient hand often persuade that camp to fold its tent without argument. Next she sets a saucepan within the larger pot of water, the same quiet double pot that kept wax courteous. Into it she measures honey, slow and golden, 1 spoon, then another, then a third that she counts as 2 because the spoon decided to be generous. The honey sits like a sun at the bottom before warmth teaches it to wander. She slips in thin slices of ginger root peeled with the back of a knife to keep its temper, and a thread of thyme, not many leaves, only enough to remind the mixture of small, steady breath. A whisper of lemon zest follows, scraped so fine it looks like yellow dust. Heat rises through the water and leans into the honey. She stirs with a wooden stick, writing small circles that smell of kitchen and hillside. The syrup thickens a fraction, not towards candy, only towards readiness. She tests a drop between finger and thumb. It stretches like a soft promise, and then returns to itself. She takes the pot from its bath and lets it consider the room while flavors finish their quiet conversation. A clean bottle waits, warm at the hearth's verge, to welcome the syrup when it is ready to move. On the bench she arranges a basket for the visit. Not much Remedies like to travel light, the bottle of cough syrup with a cork and a cloth cap, 2 folded mint compresses wrapped in waxed paper against dust, 1 small pot of plantain yarrow salve, and a narrow loaf of yesterday's bread because medicine that tastes like bread often works faster on spirits. She tucks a note card beside the bottle with neat instructions. 1 spoon at dusk, 1 at waking, a half spoon of cough interrupts rest. The card's edge carries a small mark that means keep near the bed, a habit learned after many midnight fumbles. She steps into the garden to cut 2 leaves of lemon balm, simply for cheer, and lays them at the top of the basket like a bright thought pinned to a sleeve. The gate latch answers her with its tidy click. The lane receives her sandals with dust that does not mind being moved. Shadows are longer now. Geese talk 3 houses away in the tone geese use to announce opinions no one requested. She walks at a pace that keeps the bottle upright and the compresses uncreased. A gentle aside. Much medicine is walking, carrying a useful thing the short distance between need and answer. The distance grows smaller each time neighbors practice it. At the aunt's door, a niece meets her with hands already out. She goes, the girl says, voice foot soft, but the chest still fusses. The woman nods and steps into the cool room. A window is open the width of a palm. The curtain understands how to behave and flutters only once. The aunt lies under a light cover, face long with the sort of tiredness that mistakes itself for grumpiness. The woman sets the basket on a stool, wipes her hands with her tenugui, and begins without ceremony. She loosens the head wrap a touch and lays 1 mint cloth across the forehead, another lightly over the eyes. 2 turns of the hour, she says to the niece, and change for fresher. The niece nods, taking the measure in her mind's thumb and finger. The woman lifts the aunt's hand and rubs a thumb's worth of salve where the skin at the throat meets collarbone, then along the upper chest with the light. outward circles that tell skin and breath to be friendly to one another. The ant's shoulders learn to be heavier into the mattress. The cloth cools in a way that is less of a sensation than a permission. She uncorks the syrup and lets the ant smell it first. The face folds loosen. "Not nasty," the ant murmurs. "No," the woman answers, "just opinionated honey." One spoon goes on the tongue, and the ant holds it as if it were a thought she would like to keep. The swallow is unhurried. Again at the bell before dusk, the woman says, and if the cough taps the door too hard, a half-spoon to remind it to knock more politely. The niece repeats the directions, making them solid with her voice. The woman adds, "No washing today. Sit by the door's light, feet in socks, and let the kettle speak." A gentle aside. Instructions live better when they are small and paired with habits, bells, socks. The doors light things the hands remember when the head is busy. The neighbor offers a coin. The woman closes the fingers gently around it and sends it back. "Bring me 2 eggs. Tomorrow or the next," she says. The exchange is even in the book's quiet math. They agree with a nod that includes gratitude on both sides. Before she leaves, she checks the ember in the small brazier by the bed-covered well, ash smooth. She draws the cover aside to be sure of no glow and replaces it neatly, an old promise kept again. Outside, the lane's warmth has turned thoughtful. She walks home with the empty spaces in the basket, pleased to have been useful. At her gate, the gray cat has set itself in the sun and blinks as if approving deliveries. She rewards it with a scratch at the base of the ear, a brief ceremony of civility. Back at the bench, she strains the syrup through cloth into the warm bottle. The last amber threads let go with a polite reluctance. The ginger slices she sets aside to dry. Later they may sweeten a cup for a child who does not trust bitter leaves. The bottle receives its cloth cap and a label, "Honey Ginger Thyme Syrup Afternoon." She writes the ant's visit in the plain book. Compressed 2, syrup 1 spoon, soft to chest, rest, eggs promised. She adds the weather mild breeze from hedges and a small star beside the line, her private mark for watch again tomorrow. She rinses the cloths in a bowl with a bit of vinegar so they do not remember the last head they comforted, then lifts them to the line outside. They drip small diamonds that the sun borrows for a moment and then returns to the air. She cleans the pot, wipes the stick, folds the tenugui, and returns the vinegar jar to its place in the cupboard with the label facing front. The shelf looks as if it has practiced being a shelf for years, which it has. A peddler's cart passes again, this time with the measured creak of wheels that have been oiled just enough. She trades a small salve pot for a square of clean parchment, good for labels and notes, and writes that exchange in the book as well. In the garden, these continue their quiet arithmetic among the rosemary. The loft strings move so slightly that movement can be seen only if one looks and then looks again. The kettle suggests tea for the bench worker. She takes the hint, pours a cup of hot water that has known a mint leaf briefly, and sits on the threshold where inside and out share the same air. She lets her shoulders lower until they remember shape like restful shelves. The syrup bottle cools properly, the compress cloth sway into usefulness again, the plain book lies open to the place where tomorrow will arrive. Late afternoon leans toward evening with a calm that knows its work. The kettle resumes its small voice. The woman lays out a shallow tray from the loft and brings down a few strings of dried plants, chamomile heads the color of pale butter, sprigs of lemon balm that kept their green like a quiet promise. and a short garland of lavender that reminds the air of clean linen. She sets the tray on the bench and loosens each bundle with patient fingers. Stems make the soft sound of dry reeds. Flowers hold their shape the way good chairs hold the weight they were built for. She chooses the pieces for a sleep tea. Not many and not strong, 2 chamomile heads, a leaf of lemon balm, and 3 lavender flowers. The mix sits in a clay bowl for a breath while she warms a cup by swirling it with hot water, and then pours that water away. She pinches the herbs once between finger and thumb to wake their scent, then slides them into the warm cup. From the kettle she pours water that has not reached a boil, water that speaks quietly rather than argues. A saucer becomes a lid, the cup rests, and steam keeps the room's talk simple. A gentle aside, herbs meant for sleep prefer to be invited, not commanded. Warm water and a covered cup do the inviting. Time does the rest. While the tea thinks, she prepares powders for winter jars. The mortar sits ready. Its stone has learned how to carry the circle of a pestle without complaint. She begins with dried mint leaves, crisp and light. A slow press and turn breaks them to small pieces. She does not seek dust, only a fine crumble that will measure easily into a spoon without clumping. Mint goes through a sieve she keeps for this, a basket of woven horsehair stretched on a wooden ring until the bowl below holds even green. The sieve keeps the larger bits back. Those will go to the chicken yard as a treat that teaches beaks to appreciate kitchen work. Next, she reaches for fennel seeds from a jar labeled last autumn. Seeds rattle with the small, cheerful sound of future bread and future bellies. The pestle makes a deeper note on seed than on leaf. She presses and turns until the fennel surrenders its sweet thought. A little goes a long way. Winter often asks for gentle help with a heavy supper, and fennel knows how to persuade the stomach to put down its burden quietly. She wipes the mortar with a dry cloth between herbs so each keeps its own story. A pinch of lemon balm joins the mint as a second powder. Its leaf breaks easily into a soft, friendly green. She adds nothing else. She prefers to keep jars simple, with labels that tell the truth without embroidery. Mint, lemon balm, fennel? Names are short, uses live in the plain book. She folds small packets from clean parchment and slides a spoon of each powder into its own envelope. Fold, fold, tuck, a simple geometry that remembers letters. She ties each with a thread so they do not open themselves out of curiosity. To packets she leaves blank. They will find their names after the neighbors speak. The cup lid lifts. The tea smells like evening that has already decided to be kind. She sets it aside for later and begins a small task that belongs to twilight, filling a little linen pillow with hops and lavender, an old habit learned from a woman who used to live beyond a granary, whose daughter could sleep only when the pillow shared its calm. She spoons in a handful of hops cones from a jar that lives on the high shelf, their papery skins almost weightless, and a few lavender sprigs. A running stitch closes the seam. The pillow is not clever, it is simply present. She squeezes it once to rustle the cones and wake their soft, bitter breath. A gentle aside, the nose teaches sleep about safety. Bitter herbs and clean scents remind the body that the day's gate is closed and watched. Footsteps sound at the gate, sand soft and unhurried. Two neighbors arrive together, faces set in the frank neutrality people wear when asking for help that is not an emergency. One carries a pouch of seeds tied with blue thread, The other holds a small cloth-wrapped bundle that turns out to be a wedge of hard cheese, a trade offered before words. They step into the yard and pause so the cat may decide whether they belong. The cat approves with a blink and returns to its warm idea of the flagstones. They sit on the bench's edge while the woman brings each a cup of warm water, playing first to remind throats of their own skill, then hears their quiet lists. The first neighbor speaks of a child whose dreams have grown busy since a thunderstorm. The second mentions a husband whose supper sits long and weighs a little on his breath during sleep. The woman listens with the same attention she gives to steady kettles and drying strings. For the child's restless nights she offers the small hop-sand lavender pillow. She presses it into the mother's hands and says, "Warm it by the stove's side for a count to 50, then place it near the child's cheek, not under the head. Change the face to the cloth after 2 nights so the scent is new again." She adds to parchment packets one of lemon balm powder for a very light tea, one of mint for comfort should a stomach decide to join the conversation. On each she writes a small symbol the mother knows, a star for nighttime, a leaf for after supper. For the heavy supper she measures a spoon of fennel powder into a corked vial, then writes on the plain book, "Fennel, after last bite, half spoon, walk to gate and back." The neighbor nods. The walking will do much of the work. She also wraps a small portion of rosemary sage oil for a rub to the chest if breath asked for company. Instructions go in neat words. To drops, warm hands, small circles. No talking until breath forgets to notice itself. They open the seed pouch, dill, parsley, and a few bean seeds mottled like polished pebbles. The woman counts out poppy seeds from her windowsill store and returns a small handful of coriander in gratitude. They trade pieces of the season the way neighbors knit nets strand by strand until the whole holds. A gentle aside, exchange sets a village to a comfortable temperature. Money is a winter fuel. Seeds and small jars are the blanket that touches everyone at once. They speak briefly of weather, of the baker's new apprentice who burns the first tray but not the second, of geese that have learned to scold the bucket boy less. The talk is level and without edges. The woman writes the 2 visits into the plain book with careful lines. Child dream pillow, balm and mint packets, see again in 3 days. Husband fennel powder, rosemary or rub, walk after supper, report next market day. She draws a dot beside each entry that means ask in passing, a reminder to fold care into errands rather than summon it like a trumpet. Dust places its cooler hand on the garden wall. The neighbors rise, tuck the packets into sleeves, and tie the seed pouch tighter. The cheese wedge changes hands with thanks that are more a shape of the mouth than a sound. At the gate they leave without turning to wave in this lane. Departures are assumed to be temporary, always an hour or a day from the next shared basket. The woman tidies the bench. The mortar returns to its shelf, dry and content. The sieve hangs on its peg. Powder packets find a shallow drawer lined with paper so edges won't snag. She trims the wick of the oil lamp that will replace the window's light and brings the sleep tea to the threshold to cool to a sip-friendly warmth. When she drinks, she tastes each leaf in turn: chamomile's small kindness, lemon balm's low brightness, lavender's tidy line at the end. She goes out once more to the garden and touches the strings in the loft to confirm the air still moves. The bunches sway just enough to keep their conversation with the breeze. The cat follows and sits on the last rung as if to keep count of steps. In the kitchen she folds a cloth, lays it by the lamp, and sets a small plate by the door for the cheeses seen arranged not for guests, but for the house itself, which likes to be served even when no one is watching. Evening decides itself by degrees. The garden's colors trade brightness for outline. The path keeps only what it needs. Inside the room lets the day's sounds stack neatly, kettle sigh, page turn, soft steps that have learned where the boards reply and where they simply listen. The woman lights the small oil lamp and trims the wick until the flame sits low and even, a tidy pair of yellow within its glass. She begins by bottling what remains. The rosemary sage oil has finished cooling. A faint green gold shows under the lamp like a quiet promise. She wipes the bottle's lip with a cloth, turns the cork until it finds the shape of the neck, and ties a strip of linen over the top so dust will have to argue with two decisions instead of one. The label goes on straight, letters as calm as earlier, rosemary sage oil evening, low heat. She touches the paper with the back of a finger to make sure the gum has decided to belong. Next, she raises the cupboard latch and sets each jar where tomorrow's hands will expect it. Salves to the left plant and yarrow in their small earthen pots, oils in the center with a little dish to catch any generous drop, vinegars on the right, stoppers up, labels forward. Above, the honeycomb waits, plate under it steady. On the inside of the door, the small chart receives one more line. Syrup afternoon, one bottle to neighbor, one kept. The door closes with a satisfied click, the kind a cupboard makes when it knows it is being treated as a partner. She opens the plain book and smooths the page with the side of her hand, not to rush the ink, only to make the paper remember it is a field where rows will be planted. Under the afternoon entries she writes tonight's small lines, the way a shepherd counts shadows as they fold into the fold, bottled oil, clean sieve and mortar, powders folded mint, lemon balm, fennel, dream pillow given, syrup strained and labeled. On the margin she draws a small square, her sign for all put away. The book is not proud, it is simply clear, and clarity is a kind of rest. A gentle aside, lists at day's end are the bed-making of work. Nothing in them is loud, but each line lays a quilt over a task so the mind does not wake to find it uncovered. She turns the page and writes tomorrow's list with modest words that will be easy to keep. Harvest dill head, turn strings in loft, render wax for 2 more south pots. Trade seeds to baker when oven cools, ask at gate about aunt's cough. She puts a dot beside the last item, the same dot she used earlier, so the question will know it has company. The lamp steadies as the room dims. She lifts the kettle lid and adds a spoon of water, then sets it back so a light steam will keep the air companionable. Near the hearth she arranges the firebed for the night, coals drawn together with a neat iron, ash sifted like flour across the glow until red becomes memory. She leaves a single breathing hole at the side so a small heat will live until morning without boasting. This is not ceremony, it is the long habit that keeps wood from telling stories it should not. She straightens the bench. The pestle rests across the mortar with its handle to the right, always the right, so the hand will not fumble in the dark. The sieve hangs on its peg, the strings are wound and tied, the rounded knife slides into its sheath. A clean cloth covers the board. The corner folds under so it will not flirt with fire. She moves the lamp an inch away from the cupboard door because distance is as much a tool as oil or wax. From the rafters she brings down to small bunches that have reached their promised sage that crackles when bent, and rosemary that keeps its shape even as it concedes dryness. She strips leaves into a bowl with patient fingers, leaving the brittle stems for tomorrow's kindling. The leaves go to jars plain, broad-mouthed, each labeled with the month, and a little marked for good dryness, a circle with a dot. She sets the jars on the sill to enjoy a last view of the evening before the shutter comes down. A gentle aside, the year stores itself in small containers. Summer lives as a taste, afternoon lives as a powder, kindness lives in a line of ink that remembers who needed what and when. She checks the loft one more time. The strings move just enough to be thought of as moving. The little window keeps its bargain with the breeze. A spider has set a single line between two beams. She leaves it to its work, which is also keeping. Down the ladder, the cat meets her, a soft weight against a shin, and inspects the floor as if she might have misplaced something the cat can correct. Finding no errors, it selects a corner where warm meets not warm, and curls into the shape that makes evening look complete. Someone passes the gate, steps, and a low whistle that respects doors. The woman rests a hand on the latch, not to lift it, only to be part of the route, then lets the sound go by. She lifts the lamp and closes the shutter on the garden, leaving a finger's width at the top so night air can speak without entering. The latch settles, and the house shrugs into its evening coat. She brews a last small cup, not the sleep tea set aside earlier, but a bare pinch of lemon balm and mint, enough to rinse the day from her mouth. She drinks it by the threshold, where cool meets warm, watching the square of sky that the shutter allows. Stars begin to say their small names. The kettle whispers that it can continue alone. She agrees and removes it to a cooler stone. On the table lies the dream pillow for herself, hops and lavender stitched into linen. She presses it in her hands until the scent wakes, places it near her sleeping place, and sets the lamp where its light will be a thought rather than a presence. Before she lowers the wick, she walks the simple round that keeps the house's memory straight. Touch the cupboard, pat the book closed, glance at the brazier's ash, set the pestle handle so it points like a small arrow toward morning, lift the latch of the garden door to confirm its mind, and close the basket's lid so mice will not investigate the idea of bread. A gentle aside, safety at night is the accumulation of unremarkable agreements. Each object keeps its corner of the promise. The keeper's hands tie the corners together. She turns the lamp down. Flame thins to a modest blade, then shortens to a comma, then becomes a dot that remembers being light. Smoke writes one tidy curve, and decides not to linger. The room receives dark as if it were a guest who arrives on time, and wears quiet clothing outside. The hedge composes a single rustle, and then rests. She lies down with the dream pillow near her cheek. The cat takes the foot of the bed with the gravity of an official. The kettle cools to stillness. Somewhere down the lane, a door closes a gentle fist. In the loft, strings become lines on the night's page. The plain book waits where the morning will find it, open to the place where tomorrow begins. If your breathing has followed this slow lesson label, list, hush, ash, shutter, lamp, let it continue without effort. The house of this story is sleeping, yours may join it. Now these quiet stories will keep you company as you rest. Thank you for listening, and sweet dreams.